Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex today. We have an exciting show. We're going to be joined from the UK with Paul Joseph Watson. Jakari Jackson is going to be joining us from the west coast of America. And we have our own Ann McAdoo will be on the streets of Austin talking to some hunger strikers. And if you're in Austin, you need to show up at 12:30. That's when she's going to be there. Show up to show your support for this very important issue. You know, I never paid that much attention to fluoridation because I was always on well water. We had filters because we had sediments, but once we moved here to Austin, the taste is just incredibly bad. But it's not just the taste; it's what's in the water that's very harmful for you. Why should we be forced medicated with fluoridation? Why should we have to pay to have this toxic substance dumped in? If you want to believe that it's safe and effective, and it isn't, there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of countries that have taken fluoridation, stopped fluoridation. If you want to believe, though, that it's safe and effective, would you want to put safe and effective medication into the water? Is that an effective way to deliver dosages? You're going to get all kinds of wild variation in the dosages, even if it were safe and effective. So a dosage for an adult male might be different than a dosage for a child, certainly different than the dosage for a fetus. And how do you control the dosage that anybody gets when you just dump it into the water? This is a very important and vital issue. It affects our health. And it's something that people on the right really don't seem to be aware of. It's really kind of people on the left that kind of follow the food issue a lot more closely than people on the right. But you know, when you ignore forced medication through fluoridation, eventually they're going to force medicate you with vaccinations. And if you still don't understand that, eventually they're going to force all kinds of health care on you that you don't want, don't need, can't afford, and call it something like the Affordable Health Care Act. Obamacare. You know, when you don't pay attention to these things, in principle, what we're talking about here fundamentally is forced medication. There's a lot of scientific argument that it's not safe and effective, but the fundamental argument here is that it's forced medication. And when you accept that premise, you open yourself up for being forced to take all kinds of things. Now, some of the articles we're going to be covering today with Paul Joseph Watson, we're going to be talking about an article that he has on Google. Ex-DARPA head wants you to swallow ID microchips. See, if they can force you to swallow fluoride, they can force you to swallow microchips. It's a fundamental principle. You need to stand up for that. So if you're in Austin today, then at 12:30, go to the demonstration that's in front of the state capitol rather, and Ann McAdoo is going to be there. We want to see a show of support. That's one thing that you can do. It really does matter when crowds show up. They pay attention to masses of people. So when you show up in mass for something, they pay attention to it. If you go and speak out against it at a city council meeting, we saw this happen in Raleigh. People showed up and they just laughed at the people who showed up. These people actually got together on Planet Infowars and they agreed to tackle that issue first. When they went to the city council in Raleigh, North Carolina, the city council just laughed at them and toasted them with a glass of fluoridated water. So that's the kind of response that you can expect. That's what we're seeing with these radiation readings that we see all up and down the West Coast. And Paul Joseph Watson is going to be talking about that too. He's got an article up on Infowars today, a 1,400% radiation hotspot found on a San Francisco beach. Now, in this particular case, they went through and they did a spectrum analysis. They found that the substances in it were natural radiation, but you know what? It's still radiation. You still need to be aware of what's there. You still need to have a government or county officials that don't give you snide remarks like telling you that it's the disposable plastic utensils probably that's buried in the sand. There's no evidence of that. I can't believe that they said that with a straight face. I'm sure they didn't say that with a straight face. It's probably the same sort of thing as these Raleigh officials toasting someone concerned about fluoridation with water. But it's going to be an interesting show. Paul Joseph Watson, I said, is going to be joining us to talk about his articles, and we're going to be joined later in the show with Jakari Jackson and crew on the west coast of California. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. I'm filling in for Alex Jones today. Now, you may know that Alex had a death in the family, a close relative that meant a great deal to him. And So our thoughts and prayers are with him. Please pray for him and his family. You know, as a Christian, we don't grieve as other people do. We have a hope. Now, a lot of atheists have pushed back on it and say, you know, you Christians, you work pretty hard not to die. Well, nobody wants to go through the process of dying. And then, of course, even though we have a confident expectation of what's going to happen, we still have to go through that. And we still have the loss, a pain of separation. And so nobody wants to see death. But we have a hope that is a confident expectation. We know that because of not what we've done, but because of what Christ has done, that we can expect that. And the words change, just like we see words changing in the Constitution, just like they've changed unreasonable to mean something that it never meant. Or they change the well-regulated militia. They seize on words like that and they reinterpret those in light of what the word means 200 years later or 400 or 500 years later. You know, the word hope, as it's put in the Bible, is really a confident expectation. It isn't like, well, I would like for that to happen, but I don't think that's really going to happen. So even though you know that, it's still a difficult time, and so we ask for your prayers for Alex and his family. One of the things that's affecting people all over the country is this tremendous cold snap that we have. It was just about a year ago that we went to the American Meteorological Society, and they had their meeting here in Austin. And one of the things that they proudly displayed that they were really pushing it everywhere was the fact that temperatures in the United States were warmer for the year than they had been in previous years. Although globally temperatures had gone down. And now that we see temperatures at a record low in many places, and Chicago is actually colder than it was in the Antarctic the last couple of days. And so even though we see that kind of record cold everywhere, they're saying, oh, ignore that. They cherry pick the data when they want to. Now, what we see going on here with cooling, it's not an event. It's a trend. It's a 17-year trend. And this is happening at the same time that carbon dioxide is rapidly rising and at a record rate increase in carbon dioxide. So their models have failed. The data doesn't support their conclusions. Instead of a hockey stick now, they're trying to talk about a polar vortex, and we're going to talk to Paul Joseph Watson when he joins us later in this hour. We're also going to be joined by Jakari Jackson on the west coast of California. He's going to be taking some Geiger counter readings there, and we're going to talk about what this really means. If it's not necessarily harmful if it just comes from Fukushima. You know, we look at this and we say, well, there's evidence that there's a lot of things that are happening in the Pacific Ocean. Nobody is really investigating that unless they want to tie it to climate change and global warming. They're not really interested in finding out why we see massive die-offs of certain sea populations in the Pacific Ocean. So he's going to be out there taking a look at it. And we need to understand, too, that if we see massive increases of radiation, it could be something like McClellan Air Force Base burying a lot of radium into the ground against the wishes of the local and state government. So many times government is not only not interested in investigating the cause of these things, which are health hazards, whether the radiation is coming from Fukushima or if it's a concentration of natural radiation or whether it's toxic waste that's been buried by some corporation or by the government itself. But we don't seem to get any help from that. So they're going to be taking some readings on that to see if there is a trend, if there is radioactive debris that is apparently by this time starting to get to the west coast of California, or what the real causes are of that. But as we see this record cold, one of the things that's happened in the U.S. was in Texas. We see that Forbes reported that there were frigid temperatures threatening blackouts on the Texas power grid. And we see that Bloomberg says that on the spot market, Texas power went up to $5,000 for the first time amid frigid weather. Now, they pointed out that the price of $5,000 per megawatt hour is a record. They've never seen anything that high. And to put that in perspective, when you buy your electricity, the average cost of electricity here in Texas is just over 11 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you normalize that down from a megawatt hour, what you're talking about is the power companies were having to buy power at $5 per kilowatt hour and then sell it for 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, why is that happening? Well, one of the things from the Forbes article, they said that the cold and other problems had knocked out about 3,700 megawatts of electricity power generation. But that's a really small percentage of the overall total because their shortfall was 55,000 megawatts, not 3,700, not 3,000 or 4,000. So they're about 51,000 megawatts short. Why is that happening? Because of the massive shutdown of power plants that's happening because of the EPA and because of Obama. Remember, he said he's going to shut down coal-fired power plants. He said you could build them, but they're going to bankrupt you. Well, what it's going to bankrupt is not just the power companies. It's going to bankrupt us. And he's not only attacking on-the-grid power, he's also attacking off-the-grid power. Look at what the EPA is doing under Obama. They're now going to assert that they have control over your fireplace and over your wood stove. So they're even going to come after you when you try to heat your house with wood. And the EPA is talking. We've seen this happening a long time. One of the first reports I did when I came here to Infowars was about the EPA talking about fine particulate matter. And if you look at their page, pull that page up and let's take a look at their fine. Not that one. There's one that's it's the one that's about fine particulate matter. Anyway, they show a picture of the Smoky Mountains, and they talk about how that's an example of fine particulate. That's the FAQ page there. They talk about how the Smoky Mountains are an example of fine particulate matter and smog. Well, the Smoky Mountains were named the Smoky Mountains long before even the white man came to that area. That's a natural phenomenon. It is not a phenomenon of fine particulate matter, but that's why they're trying to regulate your wood stoves. What they're saying is that we've discovered now, after all these years of burning fire, that there is particulate matter in it, and so we have to purge all particulate matter. Once you get on something like that, like they get on lead, you know, they find something that's harmful in large concentrations and large dosages, and then they gradually ramp this up until they think that they can make a world where lead doesn't exist or where fine particulate matter doesn't exist. They take it all out of proportion to the risk. You know, one of the things that I found burns really well in the fireplace is government regulations. I think it's what we need to do, because I think they've been heating Washington by burning the Constitution in massive quantities. Let's go now to that thing there, the EPA FAQs that you just had up there a moment ago. They have a couple of FAQs about when what this really means to you when they kick in these regulations in 2015. And one of the things they say is, well, the local air pollution agency says that I can't sell my old wood stove to help pay for an EPA certified wood stove. Why is that? They say, well, replacing an older stove with a cleaner burning stove will not only improve air quality if the old stove is reused somewhere else. So they go, well, then how much is that going to cost? And they say, well, it's probably going to cost you between $750 and $3,500. And they say, well, what can I do with my old non-certified stove when I want to get rid of it? And they say, well, you can sell it for scrap. You can sell it for scrap, perfectly good wood stove, or you can trade it in to a wood stove dealer. Really? Why would they give me a trade-in on something that they can't legally sell? Okay. Then they say, people have been burning wood since the Stone Age. So why is wood smoke a problem now? And they say, well, we've discovered that there's microscopic particles in it that get into your eyes and your respiratory system. And this is linked to premature death in people with these kind of chronic conditions. This is something we've heard before. Lisa Jackson went before Congress and with prodding from a Democratic congressman stated that particulate matter, fine particulate matter, would cause you to die. And she went so far as to say that there were more people dying from that than from cancer. She said it was the leading cause of death in America. And the guy who was feeding her on there in the congressional testimony said, I want you to say that again. Are you saying that more people are dying of that or cancer? And she says, yes, that's true. And then you know what she did after that? They set up an experiment in North Carolina where they advertised for people who had respiratory or heart issues, and they hooked them up to in a little room where they piped in diesel exhaust to them in quantities that were orders of magnitude higher than they would normally get out of anything. So they could create an event and then use that to argue for tighter and tighter regulations. That's the way these people work. And this same Lisa Jackson, who says, on the one hand, says this is something that is the leading cause of death, and then she hooks up people and gives them diesel particulates in a concentration that is orders of magnitude higher than the current EPA regulations in order to have an event so they can talk about that. This is the same woman who is now, she's now moved from the EPA. She's retired, and she's now working at Apple Computer on environmental issues. She's been hired by new CEO Tim Cook, who took Steve Jobs' place, because after Steve Jobs left, the Apple Computer got on board with the NSA and their PRISM program. That didn't happen until Steve Jobs was out of there. And so now it looks like Tim Cook is playing ball with this person from the EPA. And she has some real ethical issues as well. She used her private email to conduct official business. She even used the name Richard Windsor, they found out under FOIA requests. So she was doing this with lobbyists. What we see is it's not just EPA. It's not just Lisa Jackson. It's not just Apple Computer. This is a kind of revolving door that we see going back and forth between corporations and the government all the time. And it's the kind of lying that we see. She knew that particulate matter wasn't the leading cause of death. She knew that that wasn't killing more people than cancer. But she was trying to tell people that, just like they're trying to push global warming, they come up with something that suits their agenda, and they push it to the nth degree because they need to create a panic and then offer what they've already determined that they want to do as a solution. What's going on with global warming is they want to offer you something so that you go running to Al Gore and the other carbon billionaires, and you pay privileges to them for every bit of energy that you use. So they're going to create something like the Federal Reserve on a worldwide basis, but based on energy use. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back with Paul Joseph Watson. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex today. We're going to be joined by Paul Joseph Watson from the UK at the bottom of the hour. Now, we're going to talk about his recent stories. One of them was posted on Drudge Report. Ex-DARPA head wants you to swallow ID chips. That's a pretty amazing story. It's some pretty interesting information that came out of that. Also, the fact that the ex-DARPA head is now a Google executive. That's pretty significant concern, especially when you look at this in light of their purchases of so many robotics companies in the last year, and especially one in particular, Boston Dynamics, which has been making one scary robot after the other for DARPA. But he's going to be joining us from the UK. We're going to be joined by Jakari Jackson on the west coast of California. He's going to be out there looking with a Geiger counter and seeing what kind of anomalies we see in radiation there. The entire Infowars crew has gone out there to investigate that. We've had several reports of high readings on Geiger counters, and that's another article that we're going to be talking to Paul Joseph Watson about. And then we're going to be joined at 12:30, Ann McAdoo, for those of you who are here in Austin, is going to be at the state capitol. She's going to be talking to two activists who have been on a hunger strike there to try to stop fluoridation of the water. So that's something, if you understand the issue, if you're passionate about the issue, that's something to do, show up there. But, you can't always get the government to do what you want. You have to take action yourself to get things out, water filters, that sort of thing. And another thing that you need to be aware of, and this is a plug to pay for Jakari Jackson and others going out there. That's what we do is get My Patriot Supply. This is the path to liberty begins with self-reliance. Patriot Pantry is delicious, nutritious, prepares in minutes. It's a top-rated customer service, top-quality products, incredibly reasonable prices, and at a price you can afford. And you'll find that at mypatriotsupply.com/Alex. So go there today and take a look for that. It helps to support our operation. It helps to pay for all these reporters that we've got everywhere. And, of course, we've got reporters not only on the road and outside the studio, but Anthony Gucciardi is going to be joining us at the bottom of at 1:30 our time, Central Time, and he's going to be talking about issues with Fukushima and what you can do to take care of your health. It's a lot of things that we need to get the government involved. We need to get transparency from them. We need to get explanations from them. But, fundamentally, we have to go out and we have to look at this stuff ourselves. We have to educate ourselves. And in many cases, if we can't get the government to do what we want to because they've got their own agenda, then we have to take responsibility ourselves. And that means getting a backup food source from My Patriot Supply, or it means taking care of your water with your own fluoride filter, or maybe it means protecting yourself with Survival Shield or iodine of some, what we sell here. The nascent iodine at InfoWarsStore.com is a great way to protect yourself from the radiation that people are seeing spiking everywhere. It doesn't have to be from Fukushima to be dangerous. So you need to be aware of what's in your environment, not just blissfully walk along. Take precautions to save yourself from this kind of exposure. Now, this is we're about a week into the new year, and I think one of the most interesting things that's happened in this last year, there's been a lot of interesting things happen. 2013 has been one heck of a year in terms of politics, in terms of the Second Amendment, trying to take our rights to keep and own firearms away, the false flags that we saw directed at patriots and the Boston bombing. We've seen war turn back because people were aware of what's going on. And we see also now some cracks in the war on drugs. Now, this is something that means a great deal to me, not because I want to use marijuana, because I've seen the war on drugs being on the front line of destroying our constitutional rights. Long before the Patriot Act came into vogue, we had the war on drugs, and they were using that to destroy our rights everywhere. And it's a shame to see a lot of people who still don't understand this. There was an article that came out from Pat Buchanan, Is America Going to Pot? And he sees this simply as a sign of moral decline in America. But I think there's a lot more going on. I think people are waking up. I think that's a very healthy sign. I think there's a pushback from the voters against Washington in kind of a 10th Amendment way. So they're asserting that they have some rights and power over their lives. So I think that's a very positive aspect. But he focuses on some other things. He said one of the certain results of legalization of marijuana is that there's going to be more potheads, more dropouts, more deaths on the highway. What about the deaths from the war on drugs? What about drug dealers shooting it out with each other on the streets? We haven't seen that since alcohol prohibition. We saw that during alcohol prohibition. They stopped shooting each other over alcohol. Then they started shooting each other over pot. And although we still have prohibition, marijuana was one of the largest factors of sending people to jail with mandatory minimums. It's a huge part of the war on drugs. And if we can turn that back, if we can assert that we have control over our lives and we can shut down the federal government, that's a good thing. We'll be right back with Paul Joseph Watson. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex today. I'm here in the studio, and I'm going to be joined later today by Anthony Gucciardi, but we've got crew all over the place. We've got Paul Joseph Watson joining us in the UK. We've got an Infowars crew that's in the West Coast, on California coast, and they're going to be joining us with a report out there on radiation. And we also have Ann McAdoo that's going to be headed down to the Austin Capitol. She's going to be talking to two activists there who are on a hunger strike to stop fluoridation of the water. But right now we want to talk to Paul Joseph Watson in the UK. He's got a couple of articles here, and one of them just went up on Drudge Report, 1,400% radiation hotspot found in the San Francisco beach. And we also want to talk to him about an article that he had yesterday about a ex-DARPA head who now works for Google and wants you to swallow ID microchips so that your whole body becomes some kind of a biometric passcode. Or maybe they just want to track you. Maybe that's what they're going to, who knows what kind of nefarious things they're going to use this for. And that's the really scary thing. DARPA has become a very, very dark group of people. Even Michael Aquino, the guy who is at the NSA and a Satanist, an avowed open Satanist, and he wrote Mind War. And what he said of DARPA was that they were kind of the stereotypical dark, mad scientist. So this is a guy who's a Satanist and writing books on psychological warfare, and he's calling the DARPA people mad scientists. Paul, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I called it the apex of the Big Brother system. But if you watch the video that I put up yesterday, the people who are talking about this, and we can get into it later, they don't even entertain the privacy aspects of it. I mean, the woman behind it, the ex-DARPA head, who is now with Google, one of their chief executives, she didn't even entertain questions about privacy aspects. She just said, basically, shut up and swallow the pill.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
They don't even care.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was amazing. That was a quote from the article. The guy who was running the event there said, does Google know everything that I do and everywhere I go? Because let's face it, you're with Google. And she responded by laughing and said, just swallow the pill. That said, I think people need to swallow the pill that wakes them up.
The red pill or the blue pill.
That's right.
Yeah, if you want to get into that first, we can go into that.
Sure, yeah, let's talk about that.
This was a conference point. It was actually back in June, but it came to my attention because yesterday there was a new story out of Extreme Tech about Motorola's new transferable electronic tattoo, which is basically fuses to your skin, and it will allow you to be interactive and act as an authentication device for your cell phone, you know, car door, any kind of thing you need access to verify your identity. Now they're going to have a wearable tattoo. But the interesting thing about it is that it also reads your mind.
Yeah.
The thoughts in your head that are actually unvocalized. I didn't know this until yesterday, but apparently before you actually speak the thoughts in your head, the brain sends a message down to your vocal cords to form, you know, to get the muscles ready to say those words. And this device that they're talking about, Motorola, which of course is owned by Google, will be able to read those impulses sent down by the brain. So it's basically a mind-reading device that people are going to wear, both to activate their cell phone and, it said, to detect stress and emotion. So now Big Brother cares about your feelings, David.
Yeah, you know, that's the thing. There's two different aspects to your article. One of them is this biometric tracking. You know, you swallow the pill and they can track you everywhere. And that doesn't offer anything to anybody. It says, oh, you won't have to use your car keys or your house keys or whatever. And it's like, look, if anybody gets that pill, they can get into your car, into your house, whatever. That's not a security device. And you know, one of the things we have to be concerned about is that if everything is operating off of biometrics, if it's operating off of your fingerprint, or it's operating off of your retina scan, or if it's operating off of your body, then what people might do if they really want what you've got is they might cut off your finger, they might gouge out your eye, they might kill you and drag your body around to get into wherever they want. I mean, we've seen this over and over again in science fiction films. So this really doesn't have any utility for individuals. It has a lot of utility for a government that wants to track you like their personal cattle.
Well, precisely. And, you know, in that vein, they can't sell it through convenience, I don't think. Yeah. I mean, this woman, the former DARPA head, she said that you would have to take 30 pills a day in order for this to work, because they only work for apparently 7 minutes at a time. I mean, you know, I take probably about 20 vitamin pills a day. I don't always remember to take them, but it's always a hassle. Why on earth would I want to take 30 Google microchip ID pills just to be able to access my cell phone? It's not difficult to type in a four-digit number. So they're going to sell it not through convenience, but through, you know, trendy transhumanism, which is what she said in the clip, which I put up on YouTube. I made my own YouTube video about it. And she basically said that this will appeal to 10 to 20-year-olds who, quote, want to piss off their parents. So they're going to market it as this kind of rebellion, this faux rebellion against the system, when it's the very same system that's pushing it. And it goes back to the whole, you know, the cry freedom ghetto that the people who didn't conform to the Plandopolis were going to be put into. It's about, you know, those who refuse to adopt it won't be able to communicate with everybody else. And they'll basically be ostracized.
Exactly. I think one of the things that concerns me so much about this is Google's involvement in it, because they're such a large company. They can buy companies just wholesale, like Motorola or all these robotic companies. I think they got something like 8 robotics companies last year, and they bought the very best because, of course, they got Ray Kurzweil now as one of their top engineers there over in management, and he's been someone who's been pushing this transhumanist agenda for quite some time. I'm very concerned about this because I think what's behind a lot of this NSA stuff is kind of closing the loop on manufactured consent. You know, we have this massive effort by the government to move public opinion in different ways. They need to be able to monitor to see if their propaganda is working. Google is a perfect device for that. And of course, they want to look at everybody's emails, everybody's private communications to see if their propaganda is working, to see if people are following them or not. They've got bots that are getting onto Facebook and Twitter that are pushing for their particular agenda, and they need to be able to measure that. And so there's this real discomfort with me as far as Google goes and the directions that this company is moving in its ties to DARPA and dark research that really doesn't produce anything that anybody wants other than a totalitarian police state.
Well, there was actually an interview with Google's Scott Huffman about a month ago in The Independent, and he said that the short-term goal, he said, I believe 5 to 7 years, was that they plan to have microphones hanging from everybody's ceiling.
Yeah,
and then after that, chips directly implanted in their head to make Google searches easier. And again, it goes back to the question, who is going to have a chip implanted in their head to perform a Google search? I mean, it's on a common sense level, it doesn't seem to appeal. But then you have to realize that, you know, what Kurzweil has inspired is this whole transhumanist movement, which has been framed as a rebellion against the system, when in fact it's the ultimate in cultural conformism. And apparently that's the way they're going to sell it. I mean, the lady from DARPA with the ingestible chip was talking about, you know, if you have cool designs, if you make the electronic tattoo look cool and trendy, then the kids are going to want to adopt it, and they're going to want to do it to piss off their parents. So it's about, you know, it's about wearable, ingestible, and implantable surveillance technologies as a form of rebellion. That's how they're going to sell it, when in actuality it's the ultimate in conformism. It's exactly what Ray Kurzweil has predicted all along. Yeah,
exactly. I think Google really is the mechanism behind 1984. Now, of course, we had some documents that came out in Der Spiegel just before the new year that showed a couple of slides, and they were internal NSA slides, and people looked at that, and really what the takeaway for most people who reported it, because it came out just before the new year, most people were not looking at the news, but the few people who did cover that came away and said, well, yeah, they own the iPhone. They can look at everything that you're doing with the iPhone. They never fail with a hack. But when I looked at it, the thing that stuck out about it to me was the fact that the NSA was bragging about the fact that they had achieved 1984 status. The slides were 3 of them. The first one shows the 1984 slide from Apple, that the slide shows the trailer that they used, the commercial that they used to push the Mac in 1984. And they said, who would have thought that Apple would be the ones bringing us Big Brother? And they show Steve Jobs holding up an iPhone. And then they say, and that the zombies, showing the public rushing out to get the iPhones, that the zombies would be buying these tools. So they're gloating about the fact that they've established 1984. They're gloating about the fact that they have established an Orwellian society and that people are buying the instruments of their surveillance. But really, the core of this is Google, because Google is the one that is trying to get inside of your mind. Google is the one that's trying to read your thoughts. That was the other part of this article that really stuck out to me, was the fact that you sub-vocalize what you're about to say and that they could pull that in to actually try to read your thoughts. That's what Google wants to do. They want to be everywhere in your apartment, as you just pointed out, and they even want to be inside of your mind. Very, very dark.
Well, there's actually a new technology that's come out. I believe it's called Mother. I just saw the video today. And it's a Wi-Fi sensor that basically catalogs your entire life, from what time you get up in the morning, from the amount of calories you burn when you go running, from the time you have your coffee, the time you place calls to other people. And that's where it's going. They want a life log. There are several different companies that are coming out with those kind of devices that log your every single waking activity, even sleeping activity, the quality of your sleep and so forth. So it's, you know, it's the Google searches, the phone calls, the telephone records are not enough. They literally want to be the Skynet system. And it's being sold on the basis that the people will be made to love their own enslavement. They won't have to, you know, tolerate Big Brother, because they'll embrace it, because it's so cool and trendy and convenient. And that's the way it's going. It's not going in the Winston Smith direction. It's going in the direction of, you know, making Big Brother cool and trendy, and just making it an app for your entire life. And people don't care that all that information is being centralized and being cataloged.
That's right. We see evidence of that in the story about car makers keeping data on drivers' locations. And I thought it was interesting that Al Franken came out and spoke against that. He has a Judiciary Committee on Privacy, when we've seen in the past that he came out and defended the NSA. So here's a guy who's got a Judiciary Committee on Privacy, and he says, you know, the car companies are storing information about you. They're not just helping you find your way around. That's, from our perspective, that's what we see. We look at it, and it's like, it's very convenient when you move into a new city like Austin here. It's kind of a confusing freeway system, a lot of one-way streets, a lot of crossing overpasses, and so it's very useful to have something that's going to help you find your way around if you're going somewhere that you don't normally go. But they're storing all of this information, and he's upset about that, and he should be. But he's not upset about the NSA. And what we've seen over and over again is that when you give third-party information to these companies, to Google or to your internet service provider or to your cell phone company, they're keeping that information, and they can turn that over, and they do turn it over, to law enforcement without a search warrant because, of course, they just go to them and ask them for the information and turn it over. Is the same as if they were to come to your house and you said, sure, come on in and search my house. If you don't insist on your constitutional rights, then they can do that to you. And, of course, if they do it to a third party, they can get all of that information.
And again, it comes back to how much will people accept. You know, David, 10 years ago, I swore that I'd never get a cell phone because I knew from 2001 it was basically a tracking device.
Yeah.
You know, I've got 3 cell phones now. I've got a satellite navigation in the car. So how much will people tolerate? How much people will reject? When does convenience become some kind of onerous big brother? That's the question.
That's right. Yeah, they offer it to you as a convenience service, and then they gloat about the fact that you're a zombie because you buy this stuff, and they think that that gives them the moral imperative to act like it's an Orwellian 1984 state. Let's talk about this other article that just went up on Drudge. 1,400% radiation hotspot found on San Francisco beach. Tell us about that, Paul.
That was a follow-up to the investigation. You'll remember a couple of days ago we had the video of the guy with the Geiger counter on a beach in San Francisco taking radiation measurements, 500% normal background levels. Well, I actually did a follow-up, and we can get into it after the break.
Yeah, we want to talk about that because we got crew that are headed out to California, and Jakari Jackson is going to be joining us at the top of the hour, so stay tuned for that live report. The Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex. I've got Paul Joseph Watson joining us live from the UK. We've been talking about his story that just was linked to on the Drudge Report. 1,400% radiation hotspot found in San Francisco beach. Now, Kit Daniels just popped in and told me during the break that Jakari Jackson just called back with their first reading 10 times normal when they went out to the beach. 10 times normal, what would be background radiation is about 30 counts per minute. And they get about 10 times that. Now, this story that you've got here, Paul, this was 1,400%. So that's about 14 times the normal radiation that this guy found out there. But he found that no trace that it was coming from Fukushima. Is that right?
Yeah, this was a study by a guy who manufactures Geiger counters, and he said that when he analyzed the actual sand that gave the reading of 14 times normal background radiation, he found that it contained radium and thorium, which are naturally occurring radioactive elements, and that they didn't come from Fukushima because the fissile material used in those reactors is cesium-137. Mm-hmm. So they're speculating that it may have come from a disused oil pipeline that's situated near that beach, and they're doing more testing into it. But 14 times the normal safe level, now they're saying that babies and young children shouldn't be allowed on that beach because it could pose a serious health threat.
And that's interesting because we get criticized, some people saying, oh, you're a bunch of amateurs, the Geiger counter. This is a guy who's an electrical engineer that manufactures Geiger counters. And he thought it was so unusual that he took it back and he did a spectrum analysis on it to find out what it was. Now, whether or not it was cesium-137 or whether it was some naturally occurring radiation like radium and thorium, is still a very high level. You still should be concerned about it. He was concerned about it.
Well, exactly. You know, there's been kind of a backlash, hasn't there, against these people going out with their Geiger counters. Mm-hmm. What do they expect? I mean, the Japanese government has been caught lying over and over again, along with TEPCO, about the true scale of radiation releases. You know, back in September, it emerged that the true radiation levels around Fukushima were 18 times what they'd been saying because they didn't have the equipment that went up to a certain level that was required.
Yes.
They've just passed a law which basically puts journalists in prison for 10 years if they release or even seek, quote, sensitive information about Fukushima. So with that kind of distrust, I mean, what environment do they expect it to create? Of course, people are going to be suspicious. And of course, people are going to go out and do their own research.
Yeah, you're talking about the controls that they put on journalists. They've told the workers there, you know, we heard about the Fukushima 50, the people who kept going back in, exposing themselves to a very high level of radiation. We're not allowed to know the names of those people. They're not allowed to talk to people if, in fact, they're still alive. We know that the guy who was running that operation and exposed to very high levels. We know that he died of esophageal cancer, but of course, he took the company line and said it had to do with my smoking. It didn't have anything to do with that. And of course, you would expect him to say that in Japan, because what people don't understand is the undying loyalty that Japanese people in a cultural way have to the company that they work for. Many times they introduce themselves first by saying the company that they work for and then their name. That's the kind of environment that they work into. And it kind of lends itself culturally to fascism, as we see. You know, some cultures, they tend towards a communist takeover. If somebody wants to take over and run the country from an authoritarian standpoint, that culture might be, one culture might be more susceptible to communism as an excuse for that. But in Japan, it's about fascism. And so you see the workers who are there who risk their lives, who maybe have lost their lives, not saying anything, as well as the guy who was running it. But we see that there were a lot of sailors, American sailors, who were there for just 4 days, and they're coming down with all sorts of cancers, and they're speaking out. And we'll be talking about that after we come back. And we're also going to be talking to Jakari Jackson live. He's going to be giving us a report from the Pacific Ocean. He's there on the California beach, and his very first reading was 10 times normal. So that's going to be coming up right after the break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. I've got Paul Joseph Watson on the line from the UK. We're going to be talking to Jakari Jackson in just a few minutes, giving us a live report from the coast of California. Ann McAdoo is going to be joining us later in the show from Austin at a hunger strike being conducted by some activists trying to stop the fluoridation of water here in the UK. And of course, Anthony Gucciardi is going to be joining us to talk about Fukushima and radiation also in the show. But right now we've got Paul Joseph Watson on, and we've been talking about the article that just went up on Drudge Report, our article that you wrote, Paul, 1,400% radiation hotspot found on a San Francisco beach. We were just told by Kit Daniels that their first reading that the Infowars crew took out there was 10 times normal. Now, you also broke a story about 14 million dosages of potassium iodide being ordered by the government, and they want it in just 30 days. That was kind of an interesting finding.
Yeah, they're on it before the end of February.
That's right.
And people have questioned that because, you know, U.S. public health authorities have been caught lying on a regular basis for decades and decades. You can go back to atomic soldiers. You can go back to the EPA in the weeks after 9/11, saying that the asbestos-laden air was safe to breathe, which led to, you know, 20,000 people getting debilitating illnesses, many dying. That's why people don't trust the government in terms of public health crises, because they've been caught lying on many occasions.
Well, and of course, Anthony Gucciardi called up the representative from the government that was in charge of this purchasing order and asked him why they were doing that. And the guy beat around the bush and ultimately hung up on Anthony, wouldn't give him an answer.
He didn't seem too keen to talk about it, did he?
No.
First, he said they were just stockpiling it for some unknown reason. Then when Fukushima was brought into the occasion, he went kind of quiet. So people have questioned that, just like they've questioned, you know, the government buying the ammunition and the bullets, because they said, we buy it in bulk to save money. But in the case of the bullets, they were buying hollow point rounds, which cost a lot more than normal full metal jackets and are not suitable for training purposes. So again, they pulled the same excuse with the potassium iodide, saying we're buying it in bulk to save money. And people don't trust that because they've been caught lying on that before. But with Fukushima, again, you know, I'm not a scientist. I read a lot of polarizing stuff on both sides of the equation. Some people say it's a dire threat to humanity. Then others, mainly government spokespeople and officials, say it's completely harmless. I mean, there was a story out of Deep Sea News, which I think was one of the publications that attacked us, that said, quote, it's not even dangerous to swim off the coast of Fukushima. Well, I'd like to see them, you know, go and send their kids into the waters off Fukushima to prove that point, because, you know, thyroid cancers amongst Japanese children are astronomical now, so the effects are already being felt there.
And that's why you want to get that's why you want to get iodine. That protects your thyroid cancer. Is one of the most common ways that you're going to get cancer from exposure to radiation, because the thyroid is going to soak that up. We got pushed back on from that same article, probably Deep Sea News, because we reported observations that were made by the National Academy of Sciences in a paper there. And they said, well, that's just one place. This is real. And you're taking that all out of context, because that was all about global warming. And it's like, well, first of all, the the observation said that it wasn't just at that one station. It was consistent with other readings that they had gotten in the Pacific Ocean. But then to say that, well, that was just one station, we're talking about global warming. Well, then, if you're thinking about something that's global, wouldn't you think that it would be seen all over the place, not just in the Pacific Ocean, but in other oceans as well? And this is a very unusual event. And so you look at something that's an anomaly like that. This was like the highest amount of dead sea creatures that they had seen covering the ocean floor in 24 years of observation. It had gone from a typical 1% to 98%. They said, well, we have these snows that happen from plankton occasionally, but yet they look at something that's really unusual like that. And unless they can tie it into a government grant for global warming, they're not interested in investigating it and seeing what's there. You know, correlation to the location doesn't prove causality. But when you see massive events like this, canaries in a coal mine, you really ought to ask yourself what's going on here. Whether it's Fukushima or something else, you need to know. We'll be right back.
Alex Jones.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex. We've got Paul Joseph Watson on the phone from the UK. We've been talking about his article that's on the Drudge Report right now. 1,400% increase in radiation found near some San Francisco beaches, and we've got our Infowars crew out there right now to take their own measurements, and our first reports are that the first place they went to take readings, they got a reading that was 10 times normal of background radiation, which is about 30 counts per minute. They took a reading there. We're going to be joined by Jakari Jackson in just a few minutes with a live report from there. But Paul, talking about this particular case here that you've got with the article, one of the things that really stuck out to me about it is that whether or not it's radiation from Fukushima or whether or not it's a concentration, as they point out, of radium and thorium, it's still dangerous if it's in a high concentration like that. And we were just talking about how the government is not interested in investigating this. When they went out and looked at the first reports of a 500% increase, the local government officials said, well, it was probably just some red-painted disposable eating utensils. That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Do you have any idea if he was being sarcastic or laughing about that? What's the context of that? I mean,
from my reading of it, it appeared as if he was being serious. But you know, now they're saying the guy who designed the Geiger counters, you know, the big company owner is saying that this is dangerous to babies and young children. So yes, the local government initially dismissed it. Now they're saying it could be dangerous. But a very important article for people to go and read is called "The Ocean is Broken." It came out of the Newcastle Herald, and this was about a yachtsman named Ian McAdoo, and basically he sailed from Japan all the way to San Francisco. And you know, this is not coming out of Infowars. This is not from environmentalists. It's not from government scientists. It's from a guy who's seen it with his own eyes. He was in the same area 10 years before. Only had to throw his net in the sea to get a ton of fish. He went back there, sailed from Osaka to San Francisco, and this is what he said. This was after Fukushima. He sailed in April last year. He said, after we left Japan, it felt as if the ocean itself was dead. We hardly saw any living things. We saw one whale sort of rolling helplessly on the surface with what looked like a big tumor on its head. It was pretty sickening. Quote, I've done lots of miles on the ocean in my life, and I'm used to seeing turtles, dolphins, sharks, big flurries of feeding birds. But this time, for 3,000 nautical miles, there was nothing alive to be seen. And he concludes by saying, the ocean is broken. Basically said the only thing he saw was piles of debris from the tsunami, you know, bits of cars, bits of houses. All the ocean life, all the way from Japan to San Francisco, was basically dead for 3,000 nautical miles.
Wow. And that kind of correlates with what we saw in that report from some readings that were taken by the Monterey Maritime Institute there and was published in the National Academy of Sciences, saying that at one particular station, they saw an increase in dead sea creatures on the ocean floor from 1% to 98% coverage of the floor. And they said that there were other stations that were giving them similar readings. It was the highest readings that they had seen, the highest coverage of dead sea life that they had seen in 24 years of observation. Now, they were saying it was global warming, although global warming isn't happening. It's not just that we're having a cold winter right now. This is a 17-year trend. We're not talking about one event of an extremely cold, record-breaking winter in North America. We're talking about 17 years of data that does not support global warming. And yet, if the observations that they have there, everything has to be tied back to global warming because that's where they get their research grants. That's where they get their funding. And so they push back on that. But nobody is really looking at why this is happening. And they're not looking at the plausibility that this is radioactive material that's been leaked out in massive quantities from Fukushima now going on. We're coming up almost to 3 years in just a couple of months that this has been going on. You would expect that to have some effect, and that's apparently what this guy is observing as he goes across the Pacific Ocean.
Well, and part of the reason is that the fish eat plankton, don't they? And all the studies from around Hawaii and other areas, Canada as well, have shown that the fish have got abnormally very high levels of cesium-137, which is from the reactors in Fukushima. They did a study of the fish that Japan was selling to Canada and found that 90% and up of most of the fish had very high percentages of cesium-137 in their system. And this was around about a year ago now. So the fish are eating all that plankton, which is poisoned by this cesium-137. And then, you know, people who venture across the ocean say that there's nothing there. It's all dead. Then you get reports, which you just mentioned about, you know, in certain areas, 98% of the sea life is dead. You've got reports of starfishes melting, sea lion cubs dying in unusual numbers. Even in Utah, you've got bald eagles dying that some people are linking to Fukushima. So there's a mass die-off of sea life. But again, government says nothing to worry about, move along, nothing to see here, just as they did after 9/11 with the EPA saying, you know, the air was safe to breathe.
That's
then
right.
You've got in the weeks
it fits their agenda. They've got an agenda that they want to push, and they're not interested in looking at anything that falls outside of that agenda. And they're not interested in looking at anything that affects the health of the public either.
Well, in their eyes, they would say we don't want to cause panic, but, you know, that's proven very dangerous in the past. It's killed people. I mean, the EPA, immediately after Fukushima, turned off most of their radiation detectors. They raised the safe level of radiation, certain types of it, by 100,000 times.
But, you know, it isn't just that they don't want to panic the public, because they do want to panic the public when it suits their purposes. You've got the EPA going before congressional testimony saying that particulate matter is the leading cause of death, that it's higher than cancer even, and then turning around a few months later and exposing people to levels that the EPA says are 70 to 80 times levels that the EPA said were safe levels. So they will deliberately try to create a panic. They'll try to create a panic with their testimony. Then they'll even expose people to dangerous levels of something in order to create further panic. So there's a different agenda that's going on here.
Well, they choose which issues to create panic around, don't they? Yep. If there's an opportunity to centralize power and to make a ton of money, then they're going to create panic around it. I mean, look at global warming, look at terrorism. If it's in their interest, they will create the panic. Then if you've got a real threat, they will say, we don't want to create a panic, let's downplay it. And exactly. It's a genuine threat. So.
That's right. That's right. I think we've got Jakari Jackson on the line. Do we have him, guys? Is he's there? Okay, good. Let's go to Jakari Jackson. He's on the coast of California with the Infowars crew, and they've been out there with a Geiger counter taking some measurements. What do you see, Jakari?
Hey, how you doing, David? There's a lot of radiation out here. I'll say I'm a little bit concerned. We're a little bit southwest of San Francisco, south of Pillar Point Harbor on Surfers Beach. That's what the locals referred to. And you guys remember the viral video that's on Infowars.com. A man came out here with his own professional-grade Geiger counter. We have one as well, and we'll show you those readings here in a second. But when the man came out here, he saw radiation levels well in excess of what's considered to be normal out here. A normal, according to the Half Moon Bay Review, is around 30 CPM. Just in a little bit of time we've been here, we've found things close to 300, and that's just in a small section of the beach. We'll go down and show you more of that here in a little bit. But this is nothing to scoff at. You know, people are saying, various experts in the radiation fields, they're saying that this isn't cesium-137 and maybe things such as radium. And, you know, that very well could be the case, but it's very much in excess of what's considered to be normal. And also Steve Weiss, he's an electrical engineer who's been making Geiger counters for nearly 40 years. He came out here with his Geiger counter and found radiation levels in excess of 400 CPM, keeping in mind that the normal, according to the Half Moon Bay Review, is around 30, David.
So are you at the same beach that Steve Weiss went to? He found the 1,400% increase. Is it also the same beach that somebody else found a 500% increase?
That the gentleman went to in the YouTube video. I believe Steve Weiss, he was around the same area, yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, people should be concerned about that because you know what? Radiation is radiation. We have, just to say that it's radium is still dangerous. You know, radon gas can increase the risk of lung cancer as well. And we have had a report from Telly Blackwood that up in McClellan Air Force Base, which they decommissioned just outside of Sacramento, they had a huge amount of radium that they had used for illuminated dials in aircraft instruments, and it was leftover material. They had this massive mound of dirt. And the local government there in Sacramento, as well as the state government, said, you can't just leave that here. It's going to leach into the ground. It's going to get into groundwater. And they were pushing back on that. The Air Force didn't want to pay to move that. And eventually they just buried it there while people were still talking about it. I'll tell you, David,
just a moment ago, we were talking to one of the locals here, and she was telling us about barrels that were dumped somewhere around this location. And she's concerned that maybe that's the cause for the radiation. Now, she's not, so much willing to pull up stakes and move. She wants an investigation to be done, and that's why we're here. You know, it's Surface Beach, but maybe we can pan around and give them a shot. There are no surfers out here. I think I saw one a little bit ago, but now they're pretty much gone.
Yeah.
So even Surface Beach, there's no surfers at Surfers Beach.
Well, see, that's just the thing. I mean, when people go out and they take these readings and they get really high readings, the government's not really interested. And just as we saw at McClellan Air Force Base, sometimes it's the government themselves that's putting the radioactive material out there. You know, whether it's cesium-137 from Fukushima or whether it's radium from an Air Force base where they were using it in paint, still, radiation is dangerous in large amounts. It accumulates, and that's why...
You can get radiated by the sun. You don't want to be outside all day.
That's right. But, you know, it's cumulative. And when you see these kinds of increases, first of all, the government really ought to be concerned about it. But if the government's not going to be concerned about it, the people need to understand what's going on about it. And ultimately, just like fluoride, where you have to take care of yourself, you have to get a fluoride filter, you also need to be aware of how to protect yourself from this with something like Survival Shield, you know, getting a good source of clean, pure iodine like that. And that's really, ultimately, you're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for educating yourself. And you're responsible for taking the measurements to protect yourself and your family. Hang on, Jakari. We're getting ready to go to a break. We'll come back to you. Want to find out what's going on there and where you guys are going to be headed next, because we've got the Infowars crew out on the west coast of California. And not just California. I think they're going up a little bit higher. We'll talk to him about where they're going to go. Looking at this, looking to see if there are effects coming from Fukushima. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. We've got Paul Joseph Watson joining us from the UK, as well as the Infowars crew on the West Coast in California. And Jakari, we were just talking about what you were seeing there at the beach. You've taken some readings that were about 10 times normal background radiation. We had an expert, an electrical engineer who manufactures Geiger counters. He got at that same beach about 1,400% increase. So it's not just you guys as amateurs. You are amateurs out there, but you know how to read a Geiger counter. And certainly the guy who makes them knows how to read them. Where are you guys headed next?
Well, David, we'll finish up here, then we're going to start up the coast. We have a few fish markets we're going to hit. We're going to hit several beaches. We hit one this morning, and we'll show you all those reports. We're going to go down to the sand and show you guys the readings that we got a little bit ago. We'll put up a video straight to YouTube of when we went down to the sands, and keeping in mind that the normal here is supposedly 30. We got things around 270, 280. So we'll show you all of that. But for right now, in the meantime, we have the guys with the Geiger counter. So I want to take a step over here, David, and see what the guys got.
Yeah, let's take a look at that.
Okay, so we're here with the Infowars crew, and you can see the shot right here. We have 102.96, well above the told 30, which is to be normal. Tell me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, we've seen readings as high as 100, 120 here, so it's kind of concerning me, you know.
High as 100, 120, 130, and like I said, when we went down below the bluffs, we were hitting around 270. So the Infowars crew is here. We're keeping an eye on this. We're trying to get the word out to as many people and even ask people what they think it is. You know, some people say it's radioactive barrels or other types of waste that may have been dumped in the sea. We just want to talk to the people, inform the people, and see what they think it is.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jakari. We'll be looking back for your reports. Alex will be back tomorrow, and he'll be talking to you. And, of course, as you said, your reports will be going up on our channel, on our YouTube channel, as well as the nightly news tonight.
On YouTube, as well as prisonplanet.tv.
That's right. We'll have some reports tonight. Let's go back to Paul Watson in the UK. Now, Paul, this article that you had about 1,400%, certainly it's something that we should be worried about whether or not it's from Fukushima. Certainly the guy who's an expert who manufactures Geiger counters, he was worried enough about it to take it back and to do a spectrum analysis. He found that it didn't have cesium-137, which would be the fingerprint showing that it's from man-made radiation source. But if there's a lot of toxic waste that's put out there, just like McClellan Air Force Base just buried their radium waste right there at the Air Force Base over the concerns of the local authorities there, over the state authorities who told them not to do it, they just did it. So the government as well as corporations can just plop out toxic waste like this, and there ought to be a concern about where that's coming from.
Well, yeah, then they lecture us all day about global warming.
Yeah.
But the concern is we don't find out about a lot of this stuff until decades later in some cases. And back in 2011, the New York Academy of Sciences came out with a report that said over the previous 24 years, 1 million people had died as a result of Chernobyl radiation, of course, the nuclear disaster in 1986. Now, studies have shown that Fukushima has released 10 to 100 times the amount of radiation into the ocean compared to Chernobyl. Now, Chernobyl was obviously a different kind of event. Most of the radioactivity was released into the air, into the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it took 24 years to determine that it had been responsible for killing nearly 1 million people. Now, we already see reports of Japanese kids having thyroid cancers, higher thyroid cancers as a result of Fukushima. It's going to take decades before we know for sure, but this took 24 years to find out that figure of 1 million deaths attributable to Chernobyl. So we don't find out about this stuff until decades later in many cases, which is why we need to be concerned about it now.
That's right. It really bothers me when I see so many of these articles. Well, nobody has died at Fukushima. And it's like, you don't know that, because in most cases, unless somebody gets a massive, massive dose of radiation, if they do, like in a nuclear sub-accident, they can die in a matter of days. But that's not usually the way people die. Usually what you see is an increased amount of birth defects, just like we saw that calf, that sea calf, the whale calf that was a Siamese twin. You see a lot of birth defects. Things like you were talking about, the sailor who traveled across the ocean 3,000 miles, saw a whale with tumor on it, but not much else that was alive out there. So we see it as a gradual increase in the number of cancers that people get. That's the way that it typically happens. It's very dishonest of them to say, well, nobody has died of this yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, it works in slow motion, doesn't it?
Yes.
The same thing happens with everything. If there's not an immediate drastic impact, then people try and dismiss it and downplay it, but it's a long-term concern. And it's only been 3.5 years since Fukushima happened, so we're gonna be getting more cancers. We're already seeing it in the wildlife, and we're beginning to see it with humans now.
I find it very interesting. There was an article on Drudge about how the Vienna, Austria police went to a dumpster because they got high radiation readings. Turned out to just be some diapers that were contaminated with radioactive iodine from a hospital. But don't you think the government is looking for that in the United States, and maybe they're seeing high levels of radiation and they don't even care enough about us to investigate the source of that? We're going to be right back. Stay tuned.
We're on the
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex. I have on the line Paul Joseph Watson from the UK, and we're going to be going to Ann McAdoo here in Austin. There's a hunger strike that is going on to stop fluoridation of the water, and we're going to have a live coverage of that in just a few minutes from Leanne at the state capitol. But Paul, I want to talk to you. We've been talking about the radiation on the beaches, and of course, we've been talking to Jakari Jackson and crew out on the west coast of California, taking their own measurements and going up and down the coast for the next week. They're going to be filing reports here live with Alex on the news, as well as on the nightly news. But I wanted to talk to you about this article on Prisonplanet about the difference from 1974 and 2014. Time magazine was talking about a polar vortex back in 1974, except then it was global cooling, and now it's all about global warming. You want to talk about that? What's your take on that article?
Well, I mean, isn't it amazing that global warming alarmists claim you can't cite cold weather as an example of global cooling when they routinely cite hot weather as evidence of global warming whenever summer comes around? You know, they like to have their cake and eat it. But basically, the bastion of all scientific knowledge, according to them, the United Nations IPCC, said in 2007 that human-induced climate change would cause less frequent cold air outbreaks. Despite that, they're now claiming in publications like The Guardian and, of course, Time magazine, as you mentioned, that it was because of a reduction in Arctic sea ice that has caused this record cooling spell. Now, of course, Arctic sea ice has increased by 9,000 cubic kilometers over the past year. In fact, after the previous summer, it got even bigger. Polar bears, penguins, glaciers, they're all thriving. They told us ice-free Arctic summers would be here by 2014. Complete nonsense. The Arctic's growing. But now they're saying that this massive cooling spell that you've been experiencing over there is caused by us. It's all our fault. It's global warming. Yet Time magazine, the same publication that now blames this polar vortex on man-made climate change, back in a 1974 article, and this is posted on prisonplanet.com, blamed the same polar vortex on global cooling.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
by every metric that they have, their models have failed. Their predictions have failed. Everything that you can measure says that it isn't happening, that it's exactly the opposite is happening from what they predicted. I remember back in the first Earth Day in 1970, it was all about global cooling. They were predicting a new ice age at that time, and then they just completely threw that on the rubbish bin, although we saved the articles, obviously. We've got the 1974 magazine that shows them using the same excuse that they're using today to try to explain this event. But it's not just an event. It's actually a long process. This is a long trend, a 17-year trend, showing that their models don't work.
And they swap cooling for warming every 40 years, and it's because, as the Club of Rome said in their 1990 document, The First Global Revolution, humanity has to be the common enemy, no matter what the weather, no matter what the climate. They said, quote, in searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. So again, there's the elite, like some invading alien species, declaring the rest of humanity to be the enemy, and that they will create the threat of global warming as the means of, again, centralizing power, taxing us into oblivion, and basically restricting personal freedom.
It was all about blaming.
That's what it's all about.
That's right. It was all about blaming people for what was going on. And so even at times where they could show a trend of warming, there was a lot of pushback and say, you know what? The sun actually has a lot more influence on the climate than what people are doing. And certainly we can see that now from observation. We can see that with a record rise in CO2, we've had global cooling, and that has been going on for the last 17 years. And they can't really dispute the facts. They can only try to explain them away and spin them. And as you point out, it is a method for trying to establish some kind of a global regime, some kind of global governance. And it's also a way for them to set up, I believe, something like the Federal Reserve, but on a global basis. So instead of having us pay for every dollar that's printed paying interest, they can, on a global basis, have us pay for every bit of energy that we use to people like Al Gore with their carbon credits.
It's all part of this blueprint, which they seem to be using, which is Atlas Shrugged as an instruction manual. You know, it's like Obama and the EPA shutting down the coal plants. They're actively attacking free market capitalism, and one of the main ways they do that is through this climate change hysteria. So, I mean, with global warming, I mean, you've got Princeton physicist Dr. Will Happer, who says that these polar vortices have been around forever. And that's always the argument. The planet has cooled and warmed for eons. It always has done, whether humans have been around or not. But they need to blame us. We need to be the source of the blame for them to tax us, control our personal lives into oblivion, because it's all about collectivism. It's all about centralizing power into their hands, and they constantly need an excuse to do it. It's like the Saxo Bank CEO, which is another article up on Infowars.com, said that, you know, politicians need to create an irrational world because they wouldn't exist. There'd be no need for their services in a rational world. So they need to create crises that produce this irrational world then they can pose as the saviors. They can centralize power into their hands. And that's the way it works. They need crises. They need an irrational world in order to remain relevant. And climate change hysteria is one of those tools in which they use to remain relevant in the world, in an irrational world.
That's right. And what they're doing is, again, you talk about this being a bank guy warning about a collapse into a totalitarian society, trying to create a justification for what they're doing. Certainly this carbon tax credit scheme, that has banksters written all over it. I mean, it is exactly like what they did with the Federal Reserve, except just on a global basis. But you'd mentioned earlier The Guardian, and they've been very active in pushing the global warming agenda. I think it's really funny that at the beginning of December, they were talking about this expedition that was going to go to Antarctica, and they were going to follow the footsteps of an explorer there from 100 years earlier, and they were going to take measurements, and they were going to scare everybody about how much ice that we had lost. And remember that this is not the Arctic. This is the Antarctic. This is the South Pole. This is where it is summer right now. And they went down there, and they not only got stuck, but the rescue ship that went after them got stuck. Today, they finally got free after quite some time. But I think that's just the height of irony right there.
And wasn't it an American ice-breaking ship that then had to go and rescue the other ship that had been stuck? So again, and of course the expedition was about researching global warming. So again, another mammoth waste of time and taxpayer money on a completely non-existent threat.
Yep.
Just wasting millions and millions on it again, and it's a complete farce.
Yep. Well, thank you for joining us, Paul. We've got Ann McAdoo at the state capitol, and we want to go there and see what's happening with the demonstration against fluoride. Thank you so much for joining us. Those articles, 1,400% increase in radiations covered by the Drudge Report, and you can see that on Infowars.com. Leanne, are you there?
I am here. I just want to reiterate, we are not at the Capitol. We are at Austin City Hall. We're at the corner of Cesar. We're at the corner of Cesar Chavez and Lavaca. At Austin City Hall. The guys are on their 10th day of hunger strike. We've got a few people that are already kind of lining up, and the guys, it did rain last night, so they had to go up under. I guess City of Austin allowed them to sit on their property last night as they were getting rained on, so they were able to move under some shelter. We've got Tony Scott here in his dance pants. I told him to bring him out to get people pumped up, and he is full of energy, not letting this cold weather and rain stop him from getting the word out there.
And that's important. It's not only been some really, really cold nights, but it's also been raining and cold out there. And these guys have been sticking it out on a hunger strike. I apologize for giving people the state capitol. It's actually the Austin City Hall. It's at the corner of Cesar Chavez and Lavaca Street.
Yes, I just want to let everyone know who is coming to support. We've had a few people that have been driving around honking horns and stuff. We did find out that you can actually get your parking validated. They have parking here at City Hall, and you can get your parking validated there with a city clerk. So you can see 10 days of hunger strike.
Wow.
And then we're up here back in the back. I got to say, the guys are a little discouraged today. I mean, I get supremely hangry if I miss one meal. These guys are 10 days in the freezing cold rain, and they're just I'll let them tell it in their own words, but it's a little slow. It's a difficult thing getting something like getting people to be passionate about something like this. And that's why all of our listeners, all of our viewers need to come out, show your support. That you can get your parking validated. Just come out for an hour. Just let these guys know that you support what they're doing. You're here for them.
Well, I've been to a lot of political events in my life, and I can tell you that when it comes to a political cause, it's very rare for people to take time out of their day to go show up. That's why a small increase can be very effective. You don't need to have thousands of people. I mean, if you get thousands of people, they definitely pay attention. But if you get dozens of people, they will pay attention, because it's very hard for people to take time out of their normal day and go do something. But these guys are really hardcore. Like you said, it's day number 10 on their hunger strike. And it's raining out there. It's been raining this morning, certainly. So I imagine a lot of people who might have thought they might stop by there did not go because of the rain. But these guys have been sticking it out through cold weather, through rain, through everything, and doing a hunger strike to drive home a point.
Right, exactly. And Nicholas was actually saying that some of his friends were saying, you know, you're crazy for doing this. The government doesn't care that you're on hunger strike. What did you have to say to that?
The hunger strike's not about the government caring. The hunger strike is about bringing awareness to something we feel very passionately about, and it's about bringing that to you and making you feel that passion as well.
Yeah. Exactly. The government is not going to change. They're not going to do anything that we want unless we demand and let them know that we care, and this is a vital issue to us. They're not going to do any change. They've proven that. That's why they've set up the system to make it so compartmentalized so that you have to jump through all these hoops in order to get any change. But you've actually learned of some new opportunities that can possibly help get this thing at least brought to the city council.
Yeah, there's something locally we can look at. It's called Home Rule, and it's basically a local referendum. With 20,000 signatures, we can get it on the ballot for this November's elections.
Right. Yeah. And so that'll be a paper petition. We've got the change.org petition that you guys can go check out online. It's at change.org, and then you would Austin Fluoride Hunger Strike. We definitely want that one. That's going to send an alert to everyone on city council, all of our elected representatives as well. But these guys are actually, the next step, I guess, is to get an actual paper petition that people in Austin will need you to sign it. We'll need your voter ID. It's a legit petition. It's not me going out and trying to convince everyone to ban water in town. This is the real deal. And we're going to need 20,000 signatures is not a lot, but it's going to probably take a lot of grassroots efforts to make this happen. But it's tangible. This isn't like trying to impeach Obama. This is like taking poison out of the water. This is doable. It doesn't make sense. And if people are presented with the facts, I think people can really get behind this.
And it's been done before in other locations. People have had referendums where they get it out because so many times the politicians want it there because there's a lot of money to be made by the corporations disposing of their industrial waste, their fluoride industrial waste, into our water supply. You know, even if people don't understand the health issues, even if they think that it is safe and effective, as I said earlier in the program, I think a lot of people, you can get them to stop and think about, even if it were safe and effective, would you really want to force medicate the population through just dumping this into the water supply? I mean, the amount that's appropriate for different people to have is going to vary quite a bit. And of course, if you just dump your medication into the water supply, then people are going to get all kinds of different concentrations of it. It's not an effective way to medicate the population. But then it also brings into question whether or not that's a legitimate thing for a government to be doing. Should they be medicating the society against its will and forcing us to pay for that?
Right, and Nicholas, actually, that's one of their big things that they've raised on the petition is the fact that it is this forced medication, which is something that they can't do without our consent. Is that your main concern with the fluoride in the water?
My main concern is children losing IQ points over this. I mean, we have families and we have friends that we treat like family, and this is not allowable. I will not have my father go down with bone cancer. I will not have him have broken hips. I will not have my children be less intelligent, because of this practice that my government takes part in.
Yes. Exactly. And that's the big issue, too, is because they say it's for the underprivileged to help them, you know, balance out the ratio there because they can't afford dental care. But that's another big issue is that a lot of these people are using tap water to fill up their baby bottles. And there you have a baby whose body mass isn't the same as a grown adult. So how do you know if that 0.7 parts per million is not going to be highly, highly toxic to children? And I know that there's already a court case going for children. I mean, it's just one to chip away that they've got fluorosis, but that's just an aesthetic thing. Like, let's look at the issues that it's causing with cancer patients who are highly susceptible to fluoride. And like you said, with taking down the bone density, bone mass, causing fractures. There are much bigger things than just mottled teeth. That this is a big issue.
That's right. And, you know, a lot of people don't think about this because they haven't looked at the medical issues of it. As I mentioned before, I had well water, so I didn't think too much about what was going into the city water. But when I would go into town, I would get the city water. So, you know, anytime you're going to a restaurant in Austin, you're getting that fluoride, even if you're filtering your water at home, taking that into your own hands to try to protect your family. You're still exposed to it in other places when you go into the city. So it's something that we really ought to be concerned about. It's something that we're paying a lot of money to get rid of the industrial waste of companies that would otherwise have to treat this as toxic waste. Instead, they can dump it in the water, they can charge the taxpayers, they can force medicate us for something that we know is not safe and it's not effective. Well, Leanne, thank you so much for this report, and hopefully we're going to continue to follow this story, and hopefully we can get people to stand. Maybe on a day when it's not raining, we might be able to get a little bit higher turnout.
Well, I think there's more people on their way. They're circling around, honking now, letting us know that they're going to come support. Peter's here visiting from SoCal, and he ran into the guys last night. Going to forego a few meals to show his support for what these guys are out here doing. But what do you want to say? Anything you just want to tell people out in Austin?
Bring the pressure, man. Like, we've got to get this changed. And if they don't do it, we'll do it with this referendum, and we'll get it done.
That's right. 1776 worldwide.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Thanks for the report. And, of course, it would help if you have the right address, and I was giving out the wrong one earlier. That's at the Austin City Hall, the corner of Cesar Chavez and La Vaca here in Austin. So show up and support these people. I mean, they're hardcore. They understand the issues. And, if you look at this, if you investigate it, if you read the Harvard studies, you understand what an important issue this is. These people understand that. That's why for 10 days they've been on a hunger strike. They've stayed out there in record cold weather as well as today in the rain. So try to support them. It really does make a difference when you show up and tell the government what you want to see happen. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex. Now, in this last hour, we talked to Paul Joseph Watson about his story that's on the Drudge Report about a 1,400% increase in radiation observed at a California beach. We've sent our own Infowars crew out to California, and they called back with their first report, told us it was 1,000% increase over what you would normally expect to see in background radiation there on the beach. And we've got Alex Jones calling in right now to give us his take on the Fukushima emergency. Alex?
Absolutely. I am sitting here in my truck getting ready for my wonderful uncle's funeral that's in about an hour from now. I appreciate everybody's prayers for him, but I'll be back tonight and back on the radio tomorrow. I've been listening via the free iPhone app. Here with my son in the truck. Rex is with me, and you guys are just doing an amazing job. And I wanted to say something about what we're doing. It's about resistance, and it's about awakening, and we are the real media. We are hyper-professionals at telling the truth, at standing up for what is right, and for getting the word out. And that's what this is about worldwide. We're turning the tide against fluoride in Australia, England, Europe, the United States. It's being removed from more cities than it's being put into. We are winning. And so that's what all of this is about, is taking over cyberspace where the majority of people communicate. And the reason our reporters are in San Francisco and are going to go all the way up to Seattle, then fly back down to Southern California over the next week, is to get our own readings with 4 professional, one of them extremely high grade, the others are a mid-grade that costs $700 to $1,000. We are there with 4 professional Geiger counters and showing how the local news, imagine this big story, will not cover. And by the way, the normal background, Jakari was saying 30. That's since Fukushima, it's been up to 30. It was previously, according to the scientists we've interviewed, 14 micro rims. They were getting stuff at 300, 250 or higher. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a lot more than 1,000 times. It's a lot more than probably 1,400 times. And so we've got physicists that are advising us. We're crunching the numbers that our professional, awesome reporters are out there doing in the radiation to bring folks this information. And sure, being in it a few weeks is not a big issue. But when you're in that months or years, even the local paper had to admit that it's an issue. They are trying to cover up how serious this is, and we need everybody to contact the dinosaur media and to make them cover this. Quite frankly, I thought that when the news came out last week and this week and Drudge picked it up, that would force the dinosaur media to cover it. But only RT, only DrudgeReport.com, only Infowars.com, only Prisonplanet.com are covering the fact that this radio show right now that other physicists, other professionals that are out there testing it are showing the same thing that now hundreds of other people are putting on YouTube. And the health department confirmed this week for the county that San Francisco is based in that, yes, it is 5 times. We do confirm that. By the way, that's a low reading, but it's no big deal, and we don't know where it's coming from. The point is the radiation is up, and the radiation is going up all over the place. Something is going on. I mean, they're dumping toxic waste everywhere, you name it, just what you were saying earlier. So this is a big deal that don't know what this means. We're not professionals. No, we are professionals because we love the truth. We're real muckrakers, real straw hat, gumshoe reporters out there finding out the truth. And so are all our listeners. You are the media, America. You are just as important as Infowars. You are just as important as Drudge Report. You are just as important as WorldNet Daily. You are just as important. Okay, now, you're just as important as us. We're way more important than the sellout trader garbage.
Jones Show. I'm David Knight here in the studio, and we've got Alex Jones on the phone. And we were just talking about the crew that's out in California. We sent them out there with the highest quality Geiger counters that money can buy, and it's not just us. It's the guy who actually makes the Geiger counters was concerned about the levels of radiation that he found on the beach. He found what he said was 1,400% higher than what he expected to see. That's an article that is up on Infowars.com and is a link on the Drudge Report right now. But not only did the guy who actually, the electrical engineer who actually makes Geiger counters found this, we've got our people out there with professional Geiger counters, and they've seen 10 times what they expected to see. But as Alex pointed out, that's based on a new normal that they have set up, a normal that is post-Fukushima. They raised what they defined as being a normal background radiation. Alex, you were just talking about that. Do you want to continue to tell us what you think about this Fukushima issue?
Sure. And I mean, in closing, you've got a bunch of news coming up with Anthony Gucciardi with breaking news, 12 coming up at the bottom of the hour. When I get on here, I'm not bragging, hey, we're professional, hey, we're big. I'm saying we need to understand the hierarchy here. The state-run media have shown themselves to be disreputable. They're not covering this. They're not covering anything. They covered up the deadly World Trade Center dust and called me a conspiracy theorist for about 8 years and blocked aid to the firefighters, police, and others. So understand, you have traitor, state-run, globalist collaborator media. Then you have the real new emerging media that Infowars.com, DrudgeReport.com are the cutting edge of. But I'm trying to explain to our listeners, you're the media too. You're just as important as David Knight or as Joseph Farah or as a Matt Drudge or as a Joseph Curl or any of the real media. There's real media like Amber Lyon, you name it, Ann McAdoo. And then there's traitor media. So all of you, it was citizen journalists that got this to break in the last week. We picked it up, forced one local paper to talk to the county health department, who confirmed, yes, the radiation's 5 times what it should. They'll just make that the new normal. And then when it's 10 times higher, they'll make that the new normal. That's the point. The media isn't covering this. They are absolutely derelict in their duty and in their common sense and self-preservation. And so that's why I called in, because I hear our own humble reporters, well, we're out here with professional Geiger counters, but we're not professionals. We are professional reporters. Sure, we're not physicists. We have physicists advising us, and the health department has confirmed the radiation's higher. But my point is the mainstream media, they act like they are God. They act like they're a red carpet, when our reporters compared to them are literally 1,000 feet tall to a pygmy. And so that's what I'm saying. And our listeners are just as important as we are. We are the future. We are the media. We need to start not being arrogant, but being more confident about the fact that we're breaking massive worldwide news right now, and we need to be confident in this game, this football game of life, to take it to the enemy and to win this thing. We are beginning to win the game. We're beginning to wake people up. Good things are beginning to happen, but we've all got to have confidence. We've all got to be aggressive. We've all got to focus on the facts and the truth, and then stand up and be leaders. People are looking for leadership. And I'm telling you, I wasn't looking to be a leader. I don't want to be a leader, but I don't want to be a slave. And that's why I've become a leader out of necessity. All of you are leaders. And it's time for those of us who love liberty to get confident, to get aggressive, and go at the jugular of the globalists, because the radiation is freaking going up. The toxic waste, the GMO, the fluoride water, enough is enough. I've got my instinct. I'm not rolling over. I'm not dead yet. I'm not giving it to the New World Order. I'm standing up. Humanity's coming back. It's over. We're going to expose them, and no matter what they're going to do. They're keeping the media from reporting this right now. The media is being told to shut up. We're going to force it. We're going to blow their blockade wide open. God bless you all.
All right, that's Alex Jones calling in from the road. We're going to have a report from Jakari Jackson and the Infowars crew. And as Alex pointed out, the local media is not concerned about these humongous increases in radiation on their own beach. So we went all the way to California, and we've got a report coming up right after the break with Jakari Jackson, and we're going to show you what the real radiation readings are. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex, and we're going to be going in just a few minutes to Jakari Jackson, who's with the Infowars crew on the West Coast in California at the beach, where they found high levels of radioactive readings there. We ought to ask the local media why they aren't reporting this. As Alex was just saying, we're going places where the local media fears to tread, where they won't report on this. How many puff pieces, for the people in San Francisco, how many puff pieces have you seen on the local news? But they're not interested when somebody finds a 500% increase in radiation, or when they see a 1,400% increase in radiation. What our crew is seeing out there right now is a 1,000% increase in radiation. So you have the local official go out there and said, yeah, that's right, it is 500%. It's probably just disposable eating utensils. Are you serious? I mean, if they were that radioactive, do you think that they would allow them to be sold? We just saw an article from Vienna, Austria, that the police there went to they called a hazmat group on the dumpster because they saw high radioactive reading there, and it turned out that it was just waste from the hospital. They know what's out there. They're just not telling us because it doesn't fit their agenda. They're saying that they don't want to panic us, but they certainly will panic us over things that are not dangerous. They'll take away our fireplaces, our wood stoves over particulate matter when it's not really a threat. They will do all kinds of things in the name of global warming. They'll try to scare us to death over global warming when there's no data showing that that's happening. So we sent our crew out there to see what the readings actually are, because the national media is not reporting on this. The local media is not reporting on this. The government doesn't care. So we want you to see what's going on. We see that there's stuff out there that is lowering IQ, that they're putting into the water like fluoride, and there are things that can raise your IQ, like iodine, nascent iodine, can raise the IQ of kids who take that, especially the younger children. It has a positive influence on their IQ, just like fluoride has a negative influence on that. There are things that you can do that will help your family as you try to then move the government to do the right thing, to get them to stop putting fluoride in the water, to get the government to report and try to find the sources of this radiation. They're not even interested in looking at it. Whether or not it's from Fukushima, it still concerns people. It still should concern people. It's still a danger to people when you see these kind of increases in radiation. So right now we're going to join Jakari Jackson in California. Jakari, what are you guys seeing now? Where are you right now?
Well, we've come down from the bluffs where we were earlier, so now we're going to get down low to the ground with these Geiger counters. You have to get down low to the ground, so we're going to drop a little bit, and you can also see camera the radiation levels here. So, and remember,
you're taking a reading?
Yeah,
it's breaking up a little bit.
Sorry, are we breaking up? Yeah. Yes, we have a reading of 148. They're saying what's normal for this area is about 30. So we have higher levels. We're going to move right now. And once again, we have to keep low to the ground to get an accurate reading. We have about 170, 174, 172.
There we go. We've got a split screen for the people who aren't watching this. We've got one camera on the Geiger counter. The other one is showing where Jakari is in relationship to the ground. They're walking along, taking readings.
Yes, we got 176, 180. So it looks like they're increasing here. 188, 200. We've hit 200. So let's move up here. 214, 210.
Now, he's walking as he's taking these measurements. So this is not something that is one particular isolated spot that maybe we get a high reading on. It's escalated across the beach is what you're seeing here as Jakari is walking across the beach.
Yes, and we're having various readings here, 200 plus, 220. And remember, local media is saying 30 is what's normal, so about 212 right now. So very high readings. Whatever it is, whether it's cesium-137 or if it's other things like radium, it's high, it's in excess of what should actually be out here, David.
Well, and you know, Jakari, as we were just saying, it doesn't have to be from Fukushima to be harmful. I mean, radiation, high levels of radiation, whether it's from a natural source like radon or whether it is something like radium. We saw that at McClellan Air Force Base. The Air Force there decided, over the objections of the local government as well as the state government of California, they decided to go ahead and bury a massive amount of radium-contaminated soil into the ground, where it's going to leach into the water supply. And, of course, this stuff is cumulative. That's one of the reasons why we tell people to protect themselves with iodine, because one of the first places that that's going to have an effect is in your thyroid. Your thyroid is going to soak that up. Thyroid cancer is one of the things that really spikes after radiation exposure. So when you take potassium iodide in an emergency, what it does is it fills up your thyroid to try to keep your thyroid from taking in the more radioactive elements. And so you can do that for an emergency with potassium iodide, but that's not really a supplement. That's not really a good form of iodine for you. You wouldn't want to take that on a daily basis. But if you get something that is a pure source of iodine, like nascent iodine, Survival Shield, that's something you can take to help your family, to help children with IQ points. It's something that is a positive influence. It's a supplement that we no longer have in what we normally eat. And what are you saying right now? You're saying 242. That's really high.
242. Now we're going to turn around and go towards the water now.
Okay.
So, David, we're heading here towards the water. We're seeing 200 plus pretty much the whole time we've been down here. 210 right now. Once again, trying to get low to the ground to get some accurate readings here. So we got 182. So just for people to know, this isn't just in one area. We're moving across the beach.
Yes. Yeah,
you can see these high radiation levels.
You can see the camera. For those of you who are watching, we've got one camera focused on the Geiger counter. The other one is focused on Jakari. And you can see that they're walking. And as they're walking, they're taking these radiation levels. And there should be 30 CPM is what they're saying is normal now.
Yeah, now it's about 82.
Okay, so it's actually going down as you're getting closer to the water.
Water, yes.
But it was very high up at the beach. So that may indicate that it is some kind of radioactive dump that's up there, as opposed to something that's coming in off of the water as it's going down.
Yes, and as we were talking to one of the locals, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but she was telling us that out here somewhere there were a lot of waste barrels that were dumped, and she thinks that that's what may be leaching into the water. And whether it's that, whether it's Fukushima, whether it's radium or whatever else, these levels are excessively high.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that what started this really was this 500% reading that an individual did and then put the video up on YouTube, and it went viral. And everybody was asking, well, why isn't the city concerned about it? Why aren't they doing anything about it? And so then we had an engineer who actually works for a company that builds Geiger counters, and he went out and looked at it, and he saw an even higher level. He saw a 1,400% increase. So he was very concerned about it. And what he saw was not any cesium-137, which would indicate it's coming from Fukushima, but he saw radium and thorium in the sand there. So either way, it's something people should be concerned about. Now, you're seeing lower levels. You're seeing more like the regular background levels now. You're seeing 30 to 50.
Up here against some rocks. I'm seeing about 50s right now.
Okay.
Watch out for all these rocks out here.
Jakari is moving around the beach, and he's taking readings so we can see how the levels are going. Now, further up, when you were up away from the water, that was where you saw the highest readings. And
we were hitting about 270, 280.
Yeah.
And say 30 is what's normal. And, David, there's so many things going on, whether it's, as Paul was talking about, the starfish melting or the bald eagles getting tumors, the conjoined whales and whatever. We can't say all that is directly related to Fukushima, but somebody should be taking a look at these things. What is causing this?
Yes, exactly. We see that happening all across the Pacific Ocean. And as Paul mentioned, there was one fellow who wrote an article about his 3,000-mile trip. This is somebody who had done this before, going from Japan to California. He took a 3,000 nautical mile trip, and he wrote an article, "The Ocean is Dying." He said he saw, usually he would see abundant evidence of sea life. He could just drop his net into the ocean and he would catch a lot of fish, but he said he didn't see anything when he was coming across except some diseased whale that he saw. He's pretty much, in his opinion, the Pacific Ocean between Japan and California was essentially dead.
That's right. Now, Dave, we're hitting about 98, close to 100. Oh, okay, over 100 now, and they're saying that 30 is the normal level. And, we talked to a few people who were aware of the situation. We'll put those reports out later. One person said he wasn't aware, but he was very much concerned. And he, was of the opinion that whatever it was, whether it's Fukushima, whether it's radium, whatever it is, it's excessively high, and he's concerned for his family.
Now, to be clear, where you are right now is Half Moon Bay in California, right? That's just outside of San Francisco.
Yeah,
is that correct?
This is about southwest of San Francisco, and this is Surface Beach, as the locals call it here. Maybe we can pan around and give them a shot of the water here, guys. So we're real close to the water here. We're
looking at that on the map now, and here's the beach where they are. Now, you're going to be heading up
the same beach, David. I'll just interrupt you for one moment. This is the same beach where the gentleman came out here with his Geiger counter and started the whole deal. Now, our next mission, we're going to be moving all the way up the coast, all the way up to Washington. So we'll stop at various fisheries, other beaches, and so forth, and we're going to do a lot of this stuff, get as in-depth as we can, and also talk to locals and see what they think is causing these reactions.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you, Jakari. I think the people there at Half Moon Bay in that area, the people of San Francisco, they need to be concerned about this. They need to get some answers, some logical answers from their local government there, not just this ridiculous excuse that it's probably disposable eating utensils. That's just, there is a real issue there up in the sand, away from the water. They're seeing consistently high levels of radiation as they move around. And we'll be joining Jakari. They're going to be doing this for about a week, going up and down the West Coast. They're going to go all the way up to Seattle, and then they're going to go down to Southern California. And at the bottom of the hour, we're going to be talking to Anthony Gucciardi about what his take on Fukushima. We've seen a lot of things happen. He called up and asked the government about their 14 million purchases, 14 million units of potassium iodide that they purchased, and they want that in just 30 days. That was a story that Paul Joseph Watson broke when he looked through fedbiz.op. And, of course, when Anthony called up the government and talked to them about that, they were dodging and weaving, and eventually they just hung up on him. So we're going to have Anthony give us his take on what's going on after talking to that fellow and what he sees happening as we see events across the Pacific Ocean. And again, it's ultimately up to you to first take care of your family, take care of yourself, and then try to get the government to take care of the community at large. Ask some questions, because we see high levels.
Alex Jones here to tell you about how you can help spread liberty worldwide.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here in studio with Anthony Gucciardi. And we've been talking about radiation. We've been talking about Paul Joseph Watson's article. We talked to Paul from the UK. He's got an article that's linked on Drudge Report that's 1,400% radiation hotspot found on a San Francisco beach. You can find that at Infowars.com. And we've got our own crew out there. We've been talking to Jakari Jackson and the Infowars crew that's out on Half Moon Bay, just outside of San Francisco. They recorded 1,000% increase in radiation, and they walked across the beach. They were seeing this pretty consistently as they walked across the beach, a very high, elevated level from what people would expect. What's your take on this, Anthony?
Well, the secret here is that we already know from independent investigations into Fukushima, when the Japanese government was saying everything's fine, you have nothing to worry about, they emptied 78% of the radioactive waste and material into the Pacific Ocean. So there's no question. The media right now and the government's acting like it's a conspiracy theory to even say that that happened, or that it's a conspiracy theory to even say that the Fukushima plant melted down and radiation went into the Pacific Ocean. There's no question that it did, and there's no question that it is affecting us right now, and it is coming to the West Coast. I mean, we look at all these incidents, the 1,400% increase in radiation, the conjoined whale calves, the gray whale calves, for the first time ever, they were mutated and conjoined, and they're all dying along the West Coast. The eagles getting the tumors, everything is coming together, starfish melting. Some of these incidents might be separate, but ultimately there's no question that 78% of all the radioactive material from Fukushima, which was 2.5 times higher than TEPCO admitted. In that study, they found that. So TEPCO lied all about it. The Japanese government lied all about it, said people stay in Fukushima, everything's fine, when it was massive amounts of radiation. And recently, by the way, it was the highest ever coming from Fukushima. So it's not over. Experts say it could last thousands and thousands of years. So there's no debate. It is here. It is coming to the West Coast. And a good, smart government, as I've said before, would actually buy potassium iodide for its citizens. Even though potassium iodide is not the best, it's an emergency thing. They would buy really nascent iodide, but anyway, they would inform their citizens and say, hey, this is happening, so they can prepare themselves. But instead, they're denying it, and they're promoting this delusion that everything's fine and that the radiation's just from red painted utensils or, you know, anything. It's not the fact that a massive nuclear plant exploded and emptied 78% of all its radioactive material into the ocean, which is actually flowing over to the West Coast. No, no, no. It's utensils, or it's just all in your head. You know, the wildlife melting and all of this hotspot radiation as far away as St. Louis, that's nothing. So there's no question they're covering this up.
You know, it's a pattern of behavior that we see over and over again. First of all, they say that they don't want to panic people, and yet they have no problem at all panicking us if it fits their agenda. When it's something like global warming, they want to panic us because they want us to follow in their solution. They want to present to us a crisis, which in most cases is a phony crisis, so that we can buy into their solution. But when we have a real crisis like we see here, they want to deny it. You know, when you're talking about them just dumping this stuff into the ocean, it's very similar, isn't it, to the way they just dump fluoride into the water. I mean, you know, put it in there and, you know, forget about it. It's also another toxic waste that comes from industrial sources.
Well, it's also like the genetic modification of the food supply. You can't really reverse that. Even with oil spills, which are bad, you know, in some ways, environmentally, they kind of clean themselves.
Because it's crude oil, yeah.
Yeah, except when we put those artificial chemicals in to scrub them, then it's actually the worst part about it.
Or to hide it.
Yeah, exactly, which is the worst thing. Genetic modification, though, is very similar to a nuclear plant melting down, because once something is modified, the ultimate genealogy of the other plants and the spectrum of that arena environmentally are also going to be mutated.
It propagates, it accumulates.
Exactly, and it contaminates organic fields. Well, this is now contaminating our food supply in a large way and contaminating the wildlife, which are then breeding and becoming mutated and having conjoined gray whales and all this insanity. We can't really control that very well, just like we can't control GMOs, which is why everyone on this planet needs to be concerned about Fukushima. And usually, I'm not for nations coming together through things like the United Nations at all. We need to come together, though, and stop Fukushima. We need the best scientists from every nation to come together and fix this. And you notice they're not promoting that, though, because that's not part of their agenda. Instead,
well, they are coming together. They're coming together as a cover-up.
Global warming. They're coming together for global warming, even though the actual nuclear commissions are raising and creating new levels. Raising the rates and creating new levels for Fukushima, because that's how bad it is. It's worse than Chernobyl. And they're saying now, Yale and other professors are saying the rods most likely will blow up if they're transferred improperly. And we have homeless people cleaning the area and duct taping up the plant to fix it. So this is absolutely concerning meltdown level, and no one's doing anything about it.
Well, we're going to be continuing to talk about this with Anthony Gucciardi right after the break. This is something that is very concerning, and we see the governments are coming together, but they're coming together to cover this up, to raise the rates, as you're talking about, of exposure. So we'll be right back with Anthony Gucciardi. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex, and I'm joined here in studio with Anthony Gucciardi. We've been talking about what's going on with the elevated levels of radiation in California. Paul Joseph Watson was talking to us earlier from the UK. He's got a story from Infowars.com that's been linked to on Drudge. 1,400% radiation hotspot found on San Francisco beach. And we have the Infowars crew there, and they recorded elevated levels there as well, about 1,000% increase. So we'd like to take your calls, get your take on this. Tell us if you've seen anything that you think is unusual, or any personal experiences, or just what you think about what's being recorded out there. As we've got our crews going to be going up and down the west coast of California, because you know what? The national news isn't covering it. The local news isn't covering it, but it's real. And whether or not the radiation is coming from Fukushima on those beaches, or whether it's some toxic waste that's put there, is something you should be concerned about. So that number to call in if you want to talk to us and give us your take on this is 1-800-259-9231. Again, that's 800-259-9231. Anthony?
You know, the key thing here is, I'm going to reiterate, and then I want to get into one other key point, is that we don't know the origin of some of these incidents. But we do know that the Fukushima radiation, the radioactive waste, was dumped into the Pacific Ocean. 78% of it, according to one of the independent studies that challenged TEPCO, and then TEPCO had to go on record and admit that they were wrong. So we do know that it is here. It is already happening, and that was back in 2011. So they did already dump the radioactive material into the Pacific Ocean, which affects the entire food chain. It affects the entire food supply as well. So we do know that's happening. But I wanted to talk about low-level radiation. And Dr. Chris Busby, a nuclear expert, is really on point with this. Specifically, that high-level radiation, we all know is bad, but low-level radiation might actually be one of the worst kinds of exposures you can have. So Jakari and everyone out there, unfortunately, are putting themselves in danger because just as certain compounds in drugs like Tylenol, when you have too much of them, it's a bad thing. When you overdose, it's a bad thing. But there's been more deaths, according to the statistics I've been looking at, and there's some articles on Time Magazine specifically. The low levels, just a few pills of these things in the wrong circumstances can kill you quicker than the overdoses. In fact, the overdoses your body can somehow handle better because it knows how to fight it. But the lower levels can infiltrate your biological system.
That's interesting.
In ways that are different. So low-level radiation, as Chris Busby explains, Dr. Chris Busby, can be more damaging. So this is actually really, really concerning because everyone's saying, well, it's not that much of an increase. Yeah, it's a lot, but it's not that much. It could actually be worse.
Well, it's cumulative as well, right?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, why is it that the X-ray technicians at the dental office or whatever, they always leave the room? I mean, it's a low level of radiation, but they even put covering over you when they're taking an X-ray of your teeth. So the technicians are not going to stay in the room. They're going to get out because it's cumulative. And even if they were across the room, they would be getting this over and over and over again. So they stand on the other side of a lead-shielded wall when they do that. It's something that everybody should be concerned about. And I guess what's really amazing to me, and it's one of the reasons why Alex sent the crew out to the West Coast, is that here you've got somebody who has a video. He's not with the press. He's just a citizen that goes out with his Geiger counter. He looks at a 500% increase. The media is not interested. They get a local official goes out there and gives a preposterous explanation for it. Then we find 10 times increase, a 14 times increase. So we're seeing it going up by 5 times, by 10 times, by 14 times. And people ought to be asking themselves what's going on here. Whether or not it's from Fukushima, it still represents a health threat.
The whole debate is silly, though, because back in 2011, we already know there were hot particles, according to scientists, as far as Boston in 2 out of the 3 monitoring stations. That's on my new piece. It's on StoryLink and Infowars right now. We've already known that UC Berkeley found increased radiation levels in California in 2011. We've already known that they were measuring it for years and saying that, yes, it is happening. We've already known that Yale professors are saying that Fukushima radiation is already here. We've already known that thyroid problems have already developed in California. We've already known all that. So it's here. The media is making the debate is Fukushima actually affecting us in any way? It's already affected us. Mm-hmm. This is just extra stuff.
Right.
It's already here. The radiation levels are already increased everywhere across the board in many ways, background radiation in the past 60 years. And Fukushima has just exacerbated that. The key thing here is which of these scenarios are Fukushima, and then that's just kind of a distraction, though, because we already know Fukushima is an issue. We already know it's a major tumor on this entire planet. We need to fix it immediately, you know? So that's the key thing. And it's the low-level radiation that could actually be affecting us more.
Yes, that's true.
So I'm interested to find what Jakari and those guys actually read once they go up through Seattle and they go up along the coast and see if it's, you know, consistent or if it's higher in some areas or just massively high in some areas, lower in other ones. And I hope they're taking their survival shield while they're out there because they're actually affecting their health very badly.
That's right. Well, we asked for your take on this. We gave out the 800 number. We got a couple of callers here. Rich, what do you think about the radiation issue? What's your take? Hello, Rich. Are you there?
Yeah, speaking.
Yes. What do you take on? What's your take?
I tell you, I feel it. I feel sometimes that like there's needles penetrating my skin and burning my bones, to be honest with you. But I called because I've heard of a substance called Brown's gas. And it's what you do is you take water and you put a current through it and you get hydrogen and oxygen. And then you put them under pressure, recombine them, and light it up. And you can use this, it not necessarily really hot, but it's a type of chemical reaction, a form of implosion that can neutralize radioactivity.
Well, I've not heard of that. Have you heard of that, Anthony?
Well, I wouldn't exactly count on that in the event of a major nuclear incident in which you're having radioactive contamination around you. But the funny thing is that there are ways to help neutralize radiation. It's just we're not taking those steps in the United States because the government thinks it's red utensils that's increasing the radiation count in the Fukushima areas. I guess actually the Fukushima plant doesn't exist. They were a plant that made red utensils. That's the secret. It didn't blow up and melt down. They were just manufacturing red utensils at major rates.
Maybe we ought to stop the manufacture of those dangerous red utensils.
Yeah, those are the real dangers, not the radiation.
Thank you, Rich. Let's go to Mike in Illinois. Mike, what's your take on this?
You know, I've been following this for a while, and I would suggest to, well, there are some, on YouTube, I watch a live chat pretty much every night by a guy named Beautiful Girl by Dana, who has begun to get to a lot of people, and they're now listening to him. And he was a diver off the coast. He lives in British Columbia, and he was a diver for, I believe, over 30 years. And he can get you in touch with a lot of people.
Well, what is he saying? Is he saying there's radiation increases when he's finding that while diving, or what?
Oh, yeah. Well, he doesn't dive anymore. It's too dangerous.
Because of the radiation?
Yeah. Why isn't he diving? What's his concern?
Well, he didn't really say why, but what his concerns are is that he heard about the story that you were reporting on about the sea being dead a while back, and he was also reporting about since that earthquake in October 7.3, that is when Japan shut everything down. You can't get any information from them other than through TEPCO.
Well,
and the government.
TEPCO is basically run by the mafia, certain mafia elements, and they are lying on record over and over again, and they'll never tell the truth unless they're forced to, and acquiring homeless people to clean up the plant. And as I was talking about, 2.5 times the real radiation. The fake numbers were confirmed to be false, and then the real radiation is 2.5 times.
18? I thought it was like 18 because they had Geiger counters that wouldn't go.
Like one day, though. The highest levels were recent, which is the most concerning thing. It's going up, not down. It's just getting worse and worse. And if they move one of these 1,400 rods, a lot of the experts say, in fact, most of the experts say the ones that say it's not going to be that bad are really conservative. The real top experts are saying, even on Huffington Post, that just one of those rods could cause a meltdown that is leading to Fukushima forever, as in thousands and thousands of years of bombardment of radioactive attack on the biological population.
You know, if you're there and you're looking at a Geiger counter and your Geiger counter maxes out on the meter, wouldn't you think that it would be obvious to you? Certainly, if you're somebody that works at a nuclear power plant. I mean, they were obviously lying to people. I mean, what a flimsy excuse to say that, well, we now tell you that the radiation levels are higher because our Geiger counter meters were not capable of going that high. You know if your meter is maxed out. I mean, any idiot would know that with a Geiger counter. The
Japanese government just bows to TEPCO and just lets them do anything they want.
Oh, absolutely.
TEPCO is God over there. And it seems as if we can't force TEPCO to do anything because the United States isn't really doing anything about it. They're living in a delusion and promoting the delusion that Fukushima is not a big deal. And that's, as a result, causing TEPCO to be able to do anything they want.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with these 70-plus sailors who were on the USS Reagan. And they were there for just 4 days. And now a massive amount of these young, healthy people are coming down with various forms of cancer. And they're suing. They're not covering up for the Japanese government. They're not covering up for TEPCO. They're coming after them. So it'll be interesting to see what comes to light out of that. Thank you, Mike. Let's go to Trish in Canada. Trish?
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. While you were doing your show, I called the Embassy of Japan in our capital city of Ottawa. And I asked them, why is the Japanese government lying to the world about the effects of this issue? And the lady tried to get me to send a general email, so I did insist on speaking with someone. And I knew I was on tape, and the lady was trying to act like she didn't understand the nature of my question.
Yeah.
So basically, I left it at, I know you're a very smart person. You work at the embassy. It's a high-level functioning individual. And I encouraged her to eat lots of tuna.
That's good.
So she wouldn't even acknowledge the question as to why they're lying about Fukushima when everyone knows they are. It's just like when I called to ask about the 14 million doses of potassium iodide, which someone inside that exact government organization told me was a bizarre purchase. who we've had in contact with before. And then I called the individual, and he said, no, it's just a routine purchase. And I said, oh, so you don't have any concerns about Fukushima? He said, well, I can't talk about that. And I said, oh, so why did you buy it? And then he hung up on me. Goodbye. And he hung up on me and said, you know, he just purchases for the government. He doesn't know anything.
Yeah, and they purchased that massive amount, and they wanted it in just 30 days. I mean, yeah. Both of those things were red flags.
Well,
right?
It's enough for maybe some of the military, maybe some of the government branches. But here's the thing. I encourage them to supply the people with forms of iodine, but they're not doing that. They're supplying it for themselves. That's not enough for the general population at all. That's enough for maybe, you know, a couple million people for a few doses, you know, because it actually works in different concentrations, the amount they're getting. But a smart government would supply iodine to its public. But their only
concern is continuity of government. I mean, if you want iodine, you've got to buy it yourself. You've got to take care of yourself, because you know what? Guess what? The government's not going to be there to take care of you.
I mean, there's still people living in the area of Fukushima. And according to what I've seen, the Japanese government doesn't say, here, you know, take a lot of iodine or get out of here at least. But they just say everything's fine. The plant is under control. You know, we have homeless people cleaning it up with duct tape, and it's going to be perfectly fine.
That's true. That's true. Well, thank you very much, Trish in Canada. Thank you for taking it on to call them and complain about it. It's something that maybe if a lot of people did something about it, something would happen. Who knows? But at least the person you talk to knows that there's a risk now. If she didn't,
the headline bomb it in the media. I mean, RT does like 50 stories about it a day because they know that's how they get traffic, because it's so popular. I mean, if the media actually cared, here's another thing. If the media actually cared about views and money, they would talk about Fukushima every day. They would talk about GMOs every day. They would talk about fluoride. They would talk about all this stuff. They'd talk about gun rights and everything. But they don't care about actual views or money. They care about towing the actual government line that Fukushima's fine, that GMOs don't exist. It's a conspiracy theory that guns are bad and cause more crime. They don't care about views. That's why, you know, alternative news, Infowars, all these websites are skyrocketing, Infowars being the major flagship, because actual views and all of the conversions go to those topics. Things like Fukushima, people care about this.
Well, because it's stuff that affects their life
right now.
Exactly. It's not a puff piece.
If CNN actually wanted views and money and everything like that, because money is not their aphrodisiac, if they really wanted it, they would talk about Fukushima all day, and they would get tons and tons of views, and they'd become #1. But they're not ever going to do that. Never.
Exactly. Like I pointed out before, it's like, ask the people in San Francisco, how many puff pieces has the local news run when they're not really interested in covering massive amounts of increase in radiation levels on their own beach? They're not asking any questions.
No, that's nothing.
They're not going out there with a Geiger counter. I mean, we got to send people from Austin, Texas to California to report on something that is affecting the people in that area. It's just amazing.
No one else cares, and no one else is doing it. Now, that said, there are a lot of good YouTube videos popping up from people with the Geiger counters testing the snow and everything, such as St. Louis, Dutch Cincy, I think his name is. And he has a lot of good videos. Also, other people are realizing this now and looking into it, and that's the key, is if we can enable others to do it as well, we can maybe get enough of a surge to essentially headline bomb the media and make them cover it. But once again, they're not looking for views. They're not looking for money. They're looking for their agenda to follow and nothing else. Otherwise, they would already be covering it. So this, I mean, this is the last fight we have, the last push, because once those rods, once 2 rods come together, the spent fuel rods and everything, once that happens, I mean, it's Fukushima forever.
Yeah.
This is the time to stop it. This really, really is. And it's crucial for humanity that we get that out.
That's right. Valerie in New Mexico, do you want to give us your take on this?
I have a question about the nascent iodine. And I have bought it, of course, and have been taking it for a couple months now. And nowhere can I find the amount you're supposed to take in an emergency, you know, if you don't want to take the tablets. And also, how much should you be giving your pets?
Well, the thing is, the reason we don't say that is because we encourage you to speak to your physician. You know, legally and everything, we can't tell you how much you need to take because everyone's different. I would encourage you to do your own research, though. There's a lot of stuff out there. And, you know, one of the cool things about nascent iodine is you can take it every day. With potassium iodide, you do not want to take it every day. That's 100% for sure. I would encourage you to look it up for yourself, speak to a naturopathic doctor maybe, or a certified healthcare practitioner that's natural. If that's the way you want to go, that's the way I would do it. Speak to a naturopathic doctor. There is information online as well. I can't tell you what's right for you, but I know that in a nuclear disaster, I would definitely be taking the nascent iodine. and preparing myself, which I do on a daily basis anyway. So I'm already building up, preparing my body for what I know is already out there. And that's the key thing about taking it every day. But I would encourage you to look up for yourself. I don't want to tell you a certain dosage on air and then someone goes out and takes it. It's not enough. You see what I'm saying? So thanks a lot for checking it out, though. And we've gotten a lot of great reviews about it. Nothing but good stuff, actually, I've found. A lot of YouTube videos with like 10,000 views reviewing it. But anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Valerie, in New Mexico. Let's go to John in Pennsylvania. John, what's your take on this?
My take on this is that it is just an absolute atrocity for humanity. I have a little boy, and I'm worried about his future, and I live on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I don't know how I can even want to digest West Coast food any longer, knowing the information. And
well, that's a real concern. We're out of time. Hang on, we'll be right back. We'll continue your call right after the break.
To thank you.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. I'm joined in studio with Anthony Gucciardi, and we've been taking your calls. We had to go to break. We had John from Pennsylvania. We're going to try to get to everybody's calls here at the end of the show here. We've got a little bit of time, but we've got Bill in Texas, Wes in Indiana, Paul in Texas, and Mike in Wyoming. We're going to try to get to everybody. But real quickly, John, you were saying that you're on the East Coast. You're concerned about the food supply for your family. We're going to have Jakari Jackson and the Infowars crew that's out on the West Coast. They're going to be going to some fish markets as well as going up and down the coast taking readings. But you wanted to make a comment about what your concerns are?
Yes, I appreciate you taking my call. I will try to be as quickly as possible. But what I find is that, here we have Russian troops necessarily with the U.S. Are they going to be planning any kind of evacuation over the next 6 or 7 years? Because the food chain is going to be totally disrupted. So I just don't know how this is not a world emergency at this point.
Well,
it's not a paranoia. It's actual fact.
Yeah, that's true.
Look at other nations that are banning GMOs. It's very similar. If they could take action against Fukushima, I mean, these other nations are seeing the insanity of what we're doing. Not just us, the United States, but other nations as well. All these, Japan, other nations are just putting fear to the wind and just going and destroying everything, just warping the planet with genetic modification, with allowing Fukushima forever to just happen and saying, yeah, let the homeless fix it, move the fuel rods, everything. And putting fluoride in the water supply, destroying the plants with glyphosate, just doing all of this. And other nations are running scared, and they're getting rid of our imports, and they're getting rid of GMOs and banning them. Poland banning them, Peru banning them, Hungary.
And we see some countries that are getting rid of fluoride in the water, too. Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of them
European
are.
areas.
Yeah, exactly. They're waking up.
Meanwhile, we're here in this delusional state, just not even acknowledging that our food is modified, that our food is full of garbage, that radiation is coming through the West Coast via the Pacific Ocean, where 78%, again, of the radioactive waste was dumped from Fukushima. We're just sitting here in this delusional state, just not even realizing this, as the rest of the world is freaking out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're like trying to tell you that it's happening, and just trying to say that it's happening is hard. Not even the stage where we fix it. But just the stage where someone says it's happening is hard to do, with the media saying, well, is it really even happening, when it's already known to have been happening for 2 years?
Yes.
The radiation is already ongoing.
Well, it's a different agenda. The government has a completely different agenda. Thank you, John in Pennsylvania. Bill in Texas, what's your comment?
Guys, really enjoy your comments today. Something you might want to look back in history. Ask yourself why 30 millisieverts is what considered normal background radiation along the coast there, when it should be 0. And if you'll Google or look back Wikipedia, there was an incident in World War II called Port Chicago, which was an inland harbor just north of the Golden Gate cities. And they said an ammunition barge blew up, when in fact a lot of people say that was a dirty bomb the government tested to see if a harbor blast would work better than an aerial blast. And Port Chicago is a very interesting piece of history. Roads cannot go in there. There are barriers now and have been since World War II. And I think part of the reason that 30 millisieverts is what they consider standard radiation, when 0 should be the number, was probably tied into that Port Chicago incident in I believe it was. They said an ammunition barge blew up.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Bill. You know, we've seen that happen. The government is not averse to experimenting on its own citizens.
Oh, there's been plenty of radiation testing that's also increased the background radiation, including medical stuff and Chernobyl over everything. You know, many, many things that the government has had a hand in have increased the radiation. And again, low levels can be even more dangerous than high levels.
Well, we've seen the government just recently experimenting on people in the New York subway system, exposing them to airborne things, saying that they're testing for terrorist events.
Perfectly safe.
Hang on, we're going to be right back in Overdrive. We're going to try to take these last 3 phone calls here. We'll be right back.
You are listening.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. I'm joined in studio with Anthony Gucciardi, and we're going into Overdrive for one more second to try to clear off some people who called just as we were running out of time. We've got Wes in Indiana, Paul in Texas, and Mike in Wyoming. Sorry about the rest of the people we're not going to be able to get to, but let's go first to Mike in Wyoming. You had a comment about Japan and robots.
Yes, hi. I was just curious, considering that Japan is the acknowledged leader in the field of robotics, why would you sacrifice hapless, homeless people to try to do the cleanup rather than showcase your advanced robotic technology?
Well, Fukushima is perfectly safe. No,
That's right.
It's a great question. No, it's a good point. Why are we not also having the best scientists from around the world go in and decide the best ways to clean it up without using human beings, you know? That's a really good question.
Actually, DARPA has a robotics competition that they've set up, and the winner so far at this point is a Japanese company. Now, in order to participate in this contest, they had to disassociate themselves with any government funding, with any university research funding. They are the leader by far in this contest, and it's one of the companies that was bought by Google. And they bought other companies that are involved with DARPA projects like Boston Dynamics, which has been making one hideous device after the other. And so you see a lot of articles that have come out saying, this robot may save your life someday. And it's like, I don't think that's the, I don't think that's the mission statement of DARPA. But
building Terminator robots that kill people to even think about building robots that go in and stop Fukushima, because I guess they're so reckless, they don't even care about their lives being endangered by the Fukushima plant either.
That's right. Thank you, Mike. Let's go to Wes in Indiana. Wes, what's your comment?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. First and foremost, I just want to say that you guys have a great show. Been listening for quite some time. And what I want to say about Fukushima is I think that the Japanese government allowing that radiation to leak into the water supply is an egregious act of war, not only against humanity, but against Mother Nature herself. And what I'm really concerned about are what are the ramifications long term that from their actions. And one question that I had is on the global warming debate, if you had to recommend a website or a book, what would you recommend for someone who's relatively new to understanding this debate?
About global warming? What website? Yeah. There's several good websites. One of them is, what's that?
Or a book as well, he asked.
Yeah, one of them is What's Up With That? I mean, you can look up I think Lord Monckton, who we have on the radio show here quite often, he does an excellent job of debunking global warming. And he's pointed out that we've had a record rise in CO2, and yet for 17 years, we've had global cooling. And so the hockey stick that came up from man and others, that's just total hogwash. It isn't happening.
Drudge Report every day, too. They have some great stuff on that subject
absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely. Let's go to Paul in Texas. Paul, what's your comment?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Listen, I just want to say, everybody out there, you hear me, get the ProPure water filtration system. It is the Mercedes-Benz of water filtration. I'm telling you, it is unbelievable. And that's all I want to say. Have a great day.
Well, thank you. That's a great unsolicited commercial for us, and you can get that 10% off if you go to InfoWarsLife.com. So check that out. And, you know, ultimately, your health is your responsibility. And so we try to give you tools to do that. It's a win-win situation. It helps you take care of yourself, your health, your family's health, and it also funds our operation. That's what pays for us to do the kind of reporting that national and local news is not doing about these health issues. And really, in a sense, like we were talking about before, it's this idea that the government has that they can just dump anything that's toxic into the ocean and forget about it, or dump fluoride into the water and forget about it. The consequences of that are just staggering.
Exactly, and that's why we're working on ways to protect yourself with Fluoride Shield, with Survival Shield, addressing Fukushima, addressing the fluoridation of the water supply, and funding all this, going out and doing our own readings. We're going to keep it up, and we're going to fight against Fukushima in the last battle for the radiation-free planet that we are almost living on.
That's it for today. Alex will be back tomorrow. Infowars tonight at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.